Tonight, we're diving into something special, a story that stretches across every universe, every era, every version of your friendly neighborhood Spider-Man. This isn't just another recap. This is the awakening of the entire Spider-Verse. Imagine every spider hero, Peter, Miles, Gwen, Miguel, Noir, Mayday, all of them, feeling the web come alive beneath their feet. Imagine a universe where the Spider-Verse isn't fractured anymore, but connected. Where a single new spark. A child in a world that's never known a spider, sends a tremor through infinity. In this book, you'll see the birth of a new Spider-Man. The evolution of the old ones. And the moment the web itself opens its eyes. So get comfy, settle in, and let the multiverse wrap around you. And hey, before you drift off and fall asleep, make sure to hit that like button. It helps more than you know, and trust me, you'll want to stay tuned for where this story goes next. Alright, let's begin. The universe did not begin with a bang, nor with a whisper, nor even with a thought. It began, as far as anyone could understand, with a pattern, an invisible geometry woven through the dark. A lattice of possibility. A hidden symmetry beneath reality's skin, delicate as silk yet strong enough to bind worlds together. Some would later call it the web of life and destiny. Others, who walked its strands, would not bother naming it at all. They simply lived upon it, unaware that each step was guided by a cosmic tapestry far older than time. For now, the web hums quietly in the void, stretching infinitely, shimmering between universes like dew catching eternal dawn. Along these strands exist countless realities, some familiar, some impossible. Among them is one small, blue planet orbiting an unremarkable star. A planet where destiny often hinges on the choices of the young, the overlooked, the underestimated. A planet where heroes are not born in divine halls or gleaming fortresses, but in alleyways, school hallways, cramped apartments, and cluttered laboratories. This is the planet where the story begins. Or rather, where it begins again. For as long as writers have filled pages, artists have drawn panels, and storytellers have shared their dreams, the figure of Spider-Man has appeared again and again. Not as a mythic king or a celestial being, but as a boy. Often lonely, often flawed, always learning. A boy who becomes something more not because fate ordains it, but because he chooses to stand when everything pushes him down. And because somewhere, deep inside, he knows that if he doesn't act, no one else will. That simple truth, responsibility, is the anchor around which entire universes turn. Even now, the Watcher, one of the silent cosmic observers, regards this convergence of destinies with solemn curiosity. From the edges of existence, he has seen galaxies born and devoured. He has watched civilizations rise to brilliance, collapse into ruin, then rise again. Yet few stories fascinate him more than those of the Spider People, individuals touched by chance, accident, or destiny, who nonetheless choose to bear their burdens. The Watcher does not interfere. He does not alter events. But he watches, because he understands something most beings never will. The smallest people often shape the greatest legacies. And among these, none loom larger, or stand more humbly, than a young man named Peter Parker. But before the Watcher turns his gaze upon Peter's world, he pauses. Because this story is not merely about one boy from Queens. It is also about the world that created him, and the world that embraced him. It is about unsung creators hunched over typewriters and draft tables in cramped Manhattan offices. It is about artists whose hands ached from drawing webs panel after panel, and writers who fought deadlines at 2 in the morning just to express a simple idea: anyone can be a hero. It is about readers who found themselves in Peter's awkward gait, Miles's quiet determination, Gwen's fierce independence, Miguel's burdened leadership, Pavitcher's optimism, Mayday's resilience, and the playful absurdity of a pig named Peter Porker. It is about millions who looked at these characters and recognized pieces of themselves, pieces they had forgotten, denied, or never known they possessed. To understand the Spider-Man story, one must first understand the moment he stepped into the world, the real world. It was 1962. The Cold War simmered in the background, space travel teetered between fear and fascination, and American youth culture was undergoing a quiet revolution. Comic books were shifting from mythic, idealized heroes towards something more grounded. Stan Lee, a writer known for his restless ambition, felt that superheroes could be more than indestructible demigods. He believed they could be human. Steve Ditko, an illustrator whose precision bordered on perfectionism, shared that vision. Together, they created something unprecedented, a hero defined not by his perfection, but by his mistakes. When Amazing Fantasy number 15 hit newsstands that summer, no one expected much. It was a last-ditch issue of a struggling anthology series. But readers saw something new, something electric. They saw a boy who grappled with guilt, poverty, insecurity, a boy who wanted to belong, who wanted to matter. A boy who made a terrible mistake and vowed never to repeat it. The real world had never seen a hero like that. Neither had the multiverse. Across the web of life and destiny, the first strand vibrates. A signal of origin. The watcher's gaze follows its resonance as it ripples outward, brushing against worlds where familiar events unfold with subtle differences. In one universe, the spider that bites Peter Parker is irradiated by a harmless experiment, in another, it is mutated by quantum energy. In one, Peter's web shooters are mechanical, in another, they grow organically from his wrists. In one, he is raised in a cramped home in Queens. In another, he grows up in the borough of Brooklyn with parents who survive longer than fate usually allows. Every world begins with a young figure, confused yet determined, staring at their hands as strange power blooms beneath the skin. They feel fear. They feel wonder. They feel responsibility. This is the root of the Spider-Man mythos. Not the spider bite, not the costume, not the villains. It is the moment a young person realizes that power demands compassion. And that every choice carries consequences. The watcher shifts his focus to Earth 616, the primary reality in the vast Marvel cosmos. Here, Peter Parker swings between skyscrapers, still wearing the same suit stitched by hand, still mourning the loss of Uncle Ben. He is earnest, brilliant, chronically late, endlessly broke. He is overwhelmed. He is human. Yet he rises, again and again, and again. What fascinates the watcher is not Peter's power but his capacity for resilience. For in every universe, even those where Peter's story ends early or abruptly, another Spider-Person emerges to continue the legacy. Sometimes the torch passes to someone who knew Peter. Sometimes it passes to someone who never met him. And sometimes, as in the case of Miles Morales, it passes to someone who grows into greatness in his own unique way. Miles appears first in Earth 1610, the Ultimate Universe, a reimagined continuity designed for modern readers in 2000. Here, Peter Parker dies young, sacrificing himself to protect the city he loved. In the wake of tragedy, a new Spider-Man rises. Not to replace Peter, but to honor him. Miles is younger, quieter, more uncertain. He doubts himself constantly. He wrestles with grief, identity, and expectations. But he fights on. And eventually, his persistence transforms him from a shadow of Peter Parker into a Spider-Man with his own symbol, powers, and community. The multiverse watches his rise and takes notice. The watcher sees another strand of the web vibrate, a different universe, this one colored in shades of noir. In its dim alleys, a grim version of Spider-Man prowls, confronting crime with a trench coat and a perpetual scowl. In another strand, a cartoonish pig springs across panels, delivering justice with slapstick flair. In yet another, a punk rock Spider-Man rebels against tyranny with electric rage. Infinite worlds. Infinite variations. And yet, they are connected by the same central truth: the spider is not chosen for greatness, the spider chooses to rise. Still, there is another layer to this story, the real world's evolving perception of Spider-Man. The watcher cannot truly comprehend human culture, but even he recognizes the seismic shifts that occur when Spider-Man leaps from page to screen. In 2002, director Sam Raimi introduces the world to a cinematic Peter Parker portrayed by Tobey Maguire. The film is earnest, heartfelt, and revolutionary for its time. It depicts Peter not as a sleek, invulnerable figure, but as an awkward teenager grappling with guilt, desire, and fear. The movie becomes a defining moment in superhero cinema, breathing life into the character for a new generation. The web vibrates again. In 2012, Andrew Garfield takes on the mantle in The Amazing Spider-Man, portraying Peter as sensitive, emotional, and modern. This version explores the mystery of his parents, adding new layers to the mythos. Though short-lived, this era contributes its own distinct energy to the Spider-Man tapestry. Then, in 2016, Tom Holland steps into the role in the Marvel Cinematic Universe. His Peter Parker is younger still, integrated into a world crowded with heroes. He looks to Tony Stark for mentorship, to his friends for grounding, and to his heart for purpose. Holland's portrayal brings Spider-Man to billions across the globe, solidifying the character as a linchpin of contemporary storytelling. Each adaptation reshapes the real world's understanding of Spider-Man. Each shifts the collective imagination. And each subtly echoes across the multiverse, as if the stories told by human creators ripple through dimensions they never intended to reach. But the greatest rupture comes in 2018. Spider-Man. Into the Spider-Verse is unlike anything the world has seen, a kinetic explosion of animation, color, motion, and rhythm that captures the chaotic beauty of comic storytelling in visual form. It introduces a new audience to the idea that Spider-Man does not belong to one person, one timeline, or one identity. Anyone can wear the mask. Its impact is immediate. Cultural, artistic, philosophical. The film wins awards, but more importantly, it wins hearts. It makes young people see themselves in a hero who, for decades, had been overshadowed by more traditional figures. It turns Miles Morales into a global icon. It validates Gwen Stacy as a hero in her own right. It creates bridges across generations and backgrounds, sparking conversations about inclusivity, destiny, and personal growth. The watcher observes all of this and understands, storytelling, human storytelling, has extraordinary power. It shapes perspectives not only in the real world but subtly throughout the multiverse, as if the narratives told on Earth feed into the cosmic tapestry that binds realities together. And yet, as the Spider-Verse expands across media, the web of life and destiny begins to shift. New threats emerge, villains who do not merely seek to harm a single world but entire clusters of them. The Inheritors devour spider totems to prolong their existence. The Spot learns to tear holes between universes. Miguel O'Hara leads the Spider Society and attempts to preserve the structure of canon events, the tragedies that define spider heroes across dimensions. The watcher sees the tension building. He sees that for the first time, spider people are aware of each other's existence. They interact. They collaborate. Some clash, their ideologies incompatible. Others become family. He sees that every universe teeters on the fragile balance between freedom and fate. Between the idea that heroes are shaped by tragedy, and the hope that perhaps they can be shaped by choice instead. But above all, he sees something extraordinary: the Spider-Man mythos does not collapse under its complexity. It thrives. It evolves. It becomes richer with each new interpretation, each new adaptation, each new bearer of the mask. The watcher marvels at this. Few stories, very few in all existence, manage to grow without losing their core truth. Many become diluted, fractured, strained. But the Spider-Man story persists because it is not about perfection. It is about growth. It is about standing back up. This, the watcher realizes, is why the multiverse gravitates towards spider people. Why the web binds them so tightly. Why forces as ancient as destiny itself revolve around them. The spider is not a symbol of power. It is a symbol of becoming. And so the watcher turns his eyes toward a particular thread, a familiar one. A boy from Queens, hunched over a microscope, unaware that greatness approaches with the soft tap of 8 legs. A boy who believes his life is small, insignificant, ordinary. A boy who will soon discover that ordinary people can carry extraordinary burdens. But this time, the watcher does not look only at Peter Parker. He looks beyond him, across universes where other young people feel lost, afraid, unseen. Some struggle with expectations. Some wrestle with grief. Some battle questions of identity, belonging, and destiny. These people, Miles Morales, Gwen Stacy, Hobie Brown, Pavitra Prabhakar, and countless others, stand at the threshold of their own transformation. Their stories begin differently, but the theme is constant. Power without purpose is meaningless. Purpose without compassion is dangerous. And compassion without courage changes nothing. They learn that no one is ready to be a hero. No one is prepared for responsibility. No one is immune to fear. But the world does not wait for readiness. The web vibrates once more. The watcher senses the coming of a great convergence. A moment when countless versions of the spider will collide, some allying, some disagreeing, all learning from one another. A moment when the truth of the Spider-Verse will become undeniable. Destiny is a thread, not a chain. It can be followed. It can be defied. It can be rewoven. The watcher leans forward, figuratively speaking, and whispers to the reader, though he is not meant to interfere, he cannot help but offer a hint, a small guiding nudge. This is not a story of one Spider-Man. This is the story of every spider. Of every world touched by courage. Of every choice that changes a life. Of every web spun between strangers and friends, past and future, myth and memory. So begins the chronicle of the Spider-Verse. Its origins, its transformations, its tragedies, its triumphs, and its infinite possibilities. The watcher fades back into the stars. The web glows softly. The story begins. The summer of 1962 settled over New York like a warm, restless blanket. It was a year of buzzing radios, street corner debates about the space race, and teenagers dancing to songs that felt like they belonged to them and them alone. Change was in the air everywhere, cultural, political, scientific. But in Queens, the change was quiet, almost invisible. It lived in the corners people overlooked, and in the life of a boy most never noticed at all. Peter Parker walked the halls of Midtown High the way a ghost might navigate a crowd, present but unacknowledged. He hugged textbooks to his chest like they were shields, weaving between lockers without making eye contact. His classmates saw him but didn't see him. They recognized the hunched shoulders, the thick glasses, the nervous smile, but no one wondered who Peter was outside of being the school's resident science nerd. He didn't blame them. Invisibility had become a kind of armor. There were worse things than being unnoticed. Still, he felt the sting every time Flash Thompson knocked into him louder than necessary, or when someone laughed a little too loudly at his expense. It wasn't cruelty that defined his days. Just quiet exclusion, which in some ways hurt more. But Peter had learned to bury the loneliness beneath curiosity, bury pain beneath equations and experiments, bury insecurity beneath hope that tomorrow might be better. That hope felt strongest whenever he stepped into a laboratory. One particular afternoon, Midtown's science class visited the local research center for a demonstration. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead as students shuffled into a room filled with delicate equipment and experimental chambers. Energy coils vibrated with a soft hum. Technicians murmured to each other while making last-minute calibrations. Most students looked unimpressed. To Peter, the room shimmered with possibility. He pushed to the front before anyone else cared to. His notebook was already open. Mr. Warren, his teacher, gave a proud nod at the boy's enthusiasm. "What you're about to see," he said, "is a step beyond anything in your textbooks." Peter's eyes lit with a fire he rarely showed. While the demonstration began, machines pulsing with experimental radiation, the students behind him whispered among themselves about weekend plans and gossip. Only Peter kept his full attention on the equipment, absorbing each detail like sunlight on a cold day. And because his focus was so complete, so deeply immersed, he did not notice the small spider descending from the rafters above. It drifted downward on a silken thread, swaying gently as if testing the air, unaware of its role in a cosmic story that had yet to unfold. Energy from the machines bathed it in unnatural light, charging its tiny form with power no creature was meant to hold. And as Peter scribbled another line into his notebook, the spider dropped onto his hand. The sting was sharp, but so quick he barely reacted. He brushed it off, irritation flickering across his eyes. The dizziness that followed was harder to ignore. The world tilted. Colors blurred. Sound stretched. He stumbled into the hallway, gripping the wall as the floor pitched beneath him. The dizziness deepened until he could hardly breathe. Moments later, everything went black. By the time he awoke and made his way home, the world had changed in ways he did not yet understand. That night, he sat at his desk, rubbing the sore spot on his hand, lost in the foggy remains of the day. But when he reached for a fallen pencil, his hand clung to the desk more firmly than he expected. Confused, he tested it again, and stuck fast. Fear, curiosity, and wonder collided inside him. He crossed the room in 2 steps and pressed his palm to the wall. It held. Slowly, incredulously, he climbed. The panic he'd expected never came. Instead there was exhilaration, a thrill that burst through him like fireworks. He felt alive in a way he never had. Not just noticed, possible. Over the next hours, he discovered strength that startled him, leaping abilities that seemed impossible, balance that defied physics. His mind raced to understand it, to categorize the sensations. But beneath the scientist's instincts lay something more human, the intoxicating thought that he didn't have to be overlooked anymore. He could be someone. He could be remarkable. And on the other side of the page, outside Peter's fictional world, creators in Manhattan toyed with the same possibility. The idea for Spider-Man had nearly died before it lived. In the real world, superhero comics were in flux. Marvel Comics, scrappy, ambitious, not yet a global titan, was searching for something new. Teenagers were gaining cultural power. Youth identity was shifting. Stories needed fresh voices and fresher heroes. Stan Lee, restless with formulaic characters, imagined something radical. What if a superhero wasn't a perfect adult but an awkward teenager? What if the costume hit a scrawny kid who worried about school, money, crushes, and insecurity? What if the hero didn't always succeed? The proposal was met with disbelief. Teenagers weren't supposed to be heroes. They were supposed to be sidekicks. And who wanted a hero based on spiders? But the comic anthology Amazing Fantasy was ending, and Lee saw an opportunity, one last chance to try something different. Artist Steve Ditko brought the character to life with gangly limbs, anxious expressions, and costumes no polished hero would ever wear. Peter Parker was meant to feel real. And in August 1962, the world met him for the first time. Inside the story, Peter Parker's powers felt like a gift he didn't deserve. He tested them with reckless excitement. He joined amateur wrestling for quick money, donning a stitched-together suit and calling himself Spider-Man. Flashy moves came easily. Cameras pointed his way. For once, people applauded him. He felt visible. Powerful. Maybe even special. So when a fleeing thief rushed past him backstage, chased by a security guard begging for help, Peter stepped aside. Not my problem. That small choice echoed across his life like thunder. Hours later, police lights flashed outside his home. Aunt May's cries cut into the night. His uncle, the man who taught him kindness, patience, humility, had been murdered by a burglar. Peter arrived too late to save him. But not too late to recognize the thief's face. It was the man he'd let go. The guilt that poured through him did not fade. It seared itself into him, carving a wound deeper than any physical one. The first burst of anger drove him to track the man down, web him against a wall, and confront the horrible truth. He, Peter Parker, could have prevented this. His powers had given him a choice, and he'd chosen selfishness. He'd chosen applause over responsibility. He had let the world down, and worse, he had let himself down. In the real world, readers flipped through the last pages of Amazing Fantasy number 15 and felt something rare in comics: a hero who lost. A hero who made mistakes. A hero who learned from pain. Stan Lee ended the story with a final line that would become immortal. With great power there must also come great responsibility. The words resonated far beyond the page. Teachers used them in classrooms. Parents quoted them to children. Something about Peter's failure, and his resolve, felt relatable, timeless, human. Marvel realized they hadn't just created a character. They'd created a myth for a new age. Back in the fictional universe, Peter attended his uncle's funeral under a gray sky, numb with grief. He held Aunt May close, whispering assurances he barely believed himself. He tried to cry, but tears felt like forgiveness, and he didn't believe he deserved it yet. When he returned to his room that evening, he stared at the Spider-Man costume lying crumpled in the corner. It looked less like a gateway to fame and more like a reminder of the boy who had chosen wrongly. But within the grief formed a resolution. It didn't arrive dramatically. It arrived quietly, like a whisper in the back of his mind: never again. Never again would he stand by. Never again would he let someone suffer if he had the power to help. Never again would he confuse admiration with purpose. Spider-Man would not be a performer. Spider-Man would be a protector. And with that choice, the boy from Queens stepped into a role that would define generations. Marvel's offices couldn't know how deeply this story would take root. When The Amazing Spider-Man #1 released in 1963, the response was overwhelming. Letters flooded in. Readers saw themselves in Peter's struggles. Homework, awkward conversations, bullies, financial stress, the biting loneliness of adolescence. He wasn't perfect. He wasn't wealthy. He wasn't invincible. And that made him beloved. He represented something rare in fiction, a flawed hero who kept trying. Peter's fictional life continued unfolding, but the world around him changed too. In the early 60s, youth culture gained strength. The United States was on the brink of profound social reforms. Issues of identity, responsibility, moral courage, and personal growth seeped into public dialogue. Spider-Man became a reflection of those ideas, embodying the struggles of young people navigating uncertain worlds. Across comic pages, Peter refined his web shooters, learned how to swing between buildings without crashing, and threw himself into protecting the city, not for applause, but because it was right. Loneliness still followed him. Struggles continued. But the guilt that once consumed him now fueled his resolve. On quiet nights, he perched on rooftops and stared at the city beneath him. The lights looked different from above, fragile, scattered, beautiful. In each glowing window he saw someone with their own worries, their own fears, their own lives. People he could help. People he would help. The Watcher, silent, patient, observed the transformation with solemn understanding. He had seen countless heroes across countless worlds, but few began with such humility. Peter was not destined for greatness. He chose it. And that choice would ripple far beyond him, weaving through universes he could not begin to imagine. For now, though, he was just a boy with too much weight on his shoulders and too big a heart to let the world break under it. He swung into the night for the first time, not as a performer but as a guardian. Wind roared in his ears. The city blurred beneath him in streaks of color. And somewhere deep inside, for the first time since Uncle Ben's death, Peter felt something close to peace. Spider-Man had been born in pain. But he would live in purpose. And from that purpose, the greatest superhero saga in the multiverse had begun, one issue on a dying comic line, one boy in Queens, one spider that never meant to change the world, and one moment that would echo across time. The first thread of the web had been spun. The months following Peter Parker's decision to become Spider-Man carried a different weight than anything he had felt before. His days seemed split in two distinct halves, the quiet existence of a Queens teenager struggling through school and responsibilities, and the exhilarating nighttime world where he swung between skyscrapers, protecting the same city that often ignored him in daylight. The duality wasn't clean or easy. It rarely is. But it gave him something he'd never had. A purpose tied to something larger than himself. He still dealt with homework, still dodged Flash Thompson's teasing, still worried Aunt May was working herself sick, still wondered whether anyone would ever see him for who he really was. But now, woven beneath the ordinary rhythms of life, was the constant ache of responsibility. Every time he heard a siren or read about a mugging in the paper, he felt a pull to act. It wasn't guilt anymore, not exactly. It was something closer to instinct, as if the spider that bit him had rewired his sense of duty. Spider-Man's early days as a hero were messy. He learned quickly that raw power didn't guarantee victory. Criminals didn't wait for him to finish reloading his web shooters, and villains were not the petty burglars he expected. His first confrontations with costumed foes left him bruised, shaken, and painfully aware that courage did not make one invulnerable. Dr. Octopus nearly crushed him. The Vulture tossed him through the sky like a rag doll. The Lizard forced him into battles where he had to choose between hurting a monster or saving the man trapped inside it. Every victory came with the realization that he had barely survived. Through these struggles, Peter grew, not just stronger, but wiser. The Watcher observed silently as Peter began to understand that heroism was not a matter of defeating enemies, but of safeguarding lives. Sometimes that meant stepping into danger. Sometimes it meant stepping back. And sometimes it meant choosing compassion over force, even when the world seemed to demand otherwise. Around him, relationships deepened in ways he had never expected. Gwen Stacy, whose intelligence matched her beauty, began to notice Peter not as a background classmate but as someone thoughtful, gentle, and quietly brave. Harry Osborn, wealthy but emotionally fragile, became one of the few people Peter trusted. Mary Jane Watson drifted into his life in bursts of color and energy, a reminder that even in the darkest moments, joy existed if he allowed himself to reach for it. Yet each new bond carried its own burden. Keeping the secret of Spider-Man from people he cared about weighed heavily on him. Every lie he told to cover an absence, every missed date, every cancelled plan chipped away at the hope that he could ever live a normal life. Peter learned early that the mask protected more than his identity, it protected the people he loved from the danger that followed him like a shadow. Meanwhile, in the real world outside the comic panels, Spider-Man was becoming a sensation. The Amazing Spider-Man launched in March of 1963, and readers connected with Peter in ways Marvel had never anticipated. Fan letters poured in, overflowing with sympathy, admiration, and recognition. Teenagers wrote about bullying and loneliness. Adults praised the realism of a hero who worried about paying rent and supporting his aging aunt. Peter's struggles felt universal, not confined to comic book fantasy, but grounded in the everyday hardships of growing up. Marvel editors were stunned by how quickly Spider-Man surpassed expectations. In an industry dominated by flawless icons, this flawed teenager stood out like a lighthouse in a storm. The creators leaned into the realism. They embraced stories where Peter missed opportunities, made mistakes, and suffered consequences. When Spider-Man failed, it felt honest. When he succeeded, it felt earned. But fame didn't make Peter's fictional life easier. If anything, his world grew more dangerous. The Green Goblin emerged as a nemesis unlike any Peter had faced, brilliant, ruthless, and unpredictable. Norman Osborn's descent into madness would eventually intertwine with Peter's life in ways neither could imagine. Criminals evolved, strategies changed, stakes escalated. And while Peter grew into adulthood, he realized that heroism wasn't a temporary phase, it was a lifelong commitment. This era of his life was marked not only by battles, but by transitions. Peter graduated from high school and entered Empire State University, stepping into a new chapter with fresh challenges. College life introduced new expectations and pressures. It also brought new friendships, new responsibilities, and a growing awareness of his own identity. He was no longer the invisible boy from Queens, though he often felt like he was still trying to understand who he was beneath the suit. Through it all, the Watcher monitored the delicate threads of Peter's journey with measured fascination. He watched the boy wrestle with fear, guilt, love, and ambition, each thread intertwining to form the foundation of a hero whose influence would extend far beyond his world. Every choice Peter made, every mistake, every triumph, shaped not only his universe but thousands of others across the multiverse. In this period, Spider-Man truly became more than a hero. He became a symbol, both in the pages of his comic and in the minds of readers. A symbol of resilience, of humility, of strength rooted in vulnerability. He was the hero who didn't ask for greatness, didn't seek recognition, and didn't flaunt his power. He simply tried, day after day, to do the right thing, even when it cost him dearly. As the decade moved toward its end, a sense of maturity settled over Peter's story. The adventures grew darker and more complex. The emotional stakes rose. Fans noticed. Writers noticed. The world around Spider-Man was changing, both fictionally and culturally. And soon, that change would culminate in events that would alter Peter's life, and the entire comic industry, forever. But for now, in the years between 1963 and 1970, Peter Parker walked the delicate line between adolescence and adulthood, between anonymity and responsibility, between hope and heartbreak. He swung above the city not to be adored, but because someone had to. He lived with the constant tension of being young and feeling the weight of the world on his shoulders. He was growing. Not just into Spider-Man, but into the man he would become. And neither he nor the readers following his story knew that the most devastating chapter of his life was waiting just beyond the horizon. By the early 1970s, Peter Parker had grown into his role as Spider-Man with a maturity forged through hardship. He was no longer the unsure boy experimenting with powers that scared him, nor the restless teenager swinging between rooftops in search of identity. He was a young man now. Still struggling, still learning, still human, but carrying the weight of responsibility with a steadier heart. New York City had come to know him not as a novelty, but as something essential. When Spider-Man's silhouette appeared against the skyline, people felt safer, even if they didn't always admit it. Life outside the mask was more complicated. Peter's days at Empire State University were demanding, filled with labs, exams, and the constant need to earn money however he could. He juggled shifts at the Daily Bugle, stayed up through long nights of study, and tried desperately to be present for the people in his life. Gwen Stacy was at the center of that fragile balance, a presence that softened all the edges of his chaotic world. She was kind, brilliant, and patient with the emotional distance Peter often fell into. With her, he felt seen, not as a hero, but as a person. She offered the kind of future he had never dared imagine for himself. But life had taught Peter that happiness was not simple. It was something you held gently, knowing it could slip away without warning. And in his world, it usually did. The Green Goblin had returned more dangerous than ever. Norman Osborn's mind swung between clarity and madness, his darker side clawing for control. The Goblin persona obsessed over Spider-Man with a zeal that eclipsed all reason. He pieced together clues, tracked patterns, watched Peter from the shadows. When realization finally struck, that Spider-Man and Peter Parker were the same person, it was as though a dam had burst inside him. Osborn's hatred sharpened into a mission, to wound Peter in the deepest way imaginable. Peter sensed something looming, though he couldn't name it. He noticed Norman watching him with too much intensity, asking too many probing questions. But Peter's life was always full of tension, bills overdue, Aunt May's health wavering, his own studies slipping. So he brushed it aside, unaware of the storm closing in around him. Then, one night, everything changed. Spider-Man found himself drawn into a confrontation with the Green Goblin on the George Washington Bridge, the massive towers rising against the night sky like watchful sentinels. At first, Peter thought it was just another battle, dangerous, certainly, but nothing he hadn't faced before. That assumption shattered the moment he saw Gwen Stacy lying motionless near the edge of the platform, her blonde hair whipping in the wind, her wrists bound. Time seemed to stop. The Watcher, from his distant vantage beyond space and time, felt the tremor in the web of life and destiny. It was faint, subtle, but unmistakable, a moment with consequences that would echo through countless universes. A fixed point forming itself in tragedy. Spider-Man lunged forward in horror as the Goblin taunted him. Norman Osborn, in full madness, seized Gwen and hurled her from the bridge. Her scream sliced through the night air. Peter reacted without thinking. He fired a web line with desperate speed and caught her ankle before she struck the water far below. Relief surged through him for a single breath. Then he heard it. A faint snap. Silence in the air that followed felt heavier than gravity. When Peter pulled Gwen back to the bridge, her body hung limply in his arms. No breath. No pulse. Nothing left but absence. The world narrowed into a tunnel of disbelief. He whispered her name again and again, as if the sound could bring her back. The Watcher observed the agony spreading across Peter's face, the kind of agony that reshapes a life. Spider-Man chased the Goblin with grief turning to fury. Their battle was brutal, personal, fueled by pain that words couldn't hold. Norman Osborn fell shortly after, impaled by his own glider, but Peter felt no triumph. His victory felt hollow, poisoned by loss. For the first time since Uncle Ben's death, he wondered if the cost of being Spider-Man was too high for any one person to bear. Outside the page, readers turned from panel to panel in stunned silence. Gwen Stacy's death in 1973 wasn't just a dramatic moment, it was a rupture in the expectations of an entire industry. Comics didn't do this. Love interests didn't die, not permanently. Heroes didn't fail this completely. Yet Spider-Man did, and readers could feel the honesty of his pain. The decision to kill Gwen had been bold, controversial, and deeply debated behind the scenes at Marvel. But the editorial choice marked a turning point in storytelling. It signaled the end of Silver Age innocence and the beginning of a darker, more realistic Bronze Age, where consequences mattered and tragedy wasn't always reversible. Gwen's death became one of the most defining moments in superhero history, shaping not only Peter Parker but the entire medium. In the fictional universe, Peter spiraled into grief, guilt, and self-doubt. He replayed the night on the bridge endlessly, wondering if catching her too abruptly had been his fault, whether a different angle or quicker reaction might have saved her. The line between responsibility and self-blame blurred until every thought hurt. He isolated himself, avoiding friends who didn't understand the depths of his loss. Even Mary Jane Watson, who approached him with quiet concern, could barely break through the emotional shell he built around himself. Meanwhile, the world around Peter continued shifting. Harry Osborn, devastated by his father's death and already wrestling with addiction, blamed Spider-Man for everything. His grief festered into obsession, setting the stage for a feud that would define years of Peter's life. The threads binding these characters grew darker and more tangled, driven by emotional realism that reflected the changing tone of the times. The era also saw Peter become more politically and socially aware. New York was undergoing cultural transformation, student protests, civil rights movements, and shifting social norms filled the newspapers Peter read between classes. The real world of the 1970s seeped into the comics in subtle ways, influencing Peter's compassion and commitment. Spider-Man wasn't just fighting costumed villains anymore, he was confronting the world's complexities, injustices, and uncertainties. Yet through all of this, he kept going. That was Peter's defining trait. He didn't heal quickly. He didn't forget. But he refused to give up. Slowly, with the help of friends who refused to let him drift away entirely, Peter found a way to live with his grief rather than drown in it. Tragedy had shaped him again, but it didn't destroy him. It deepened him. And in the real world, this depth drew even more readers to his story. Spider-Man became a mirror for people navigating their own losses, their own heartbreaks, their own sense of responsibility in a world that often felt overwhelming. The character matured as the audience matured. He grew with them, carried their hopes and fears in every panel. By the mid-1970s, Peter Parker stood on the other side of one of the greatest tragedies of his life. His relationships had changed. His worldview had shifted. But he remained Spider-Man, not because it was easy, but because he couldn't walk away from the calling that defined him. He swung through Manhattan knowing that every life he saved mattered, because he understood all too well the weight of a life lost. The Watcher, ever silent, acknowledged that this chapter had sealed itself into destiny. Gwen's death was not merely a moment in one universe, it became a narrative cornerstone across the Spider-Verse. In countless worlds, in countless variations, spider-heroes would experience their own fixed points in tragedy, echoes of that night on the bridge. The boy who once wanted only to be noticed had become a man defined by compassion, resilience, and painful wisdom. And though the next chapters of his life would bring new allies, new battles, and new transformations, the shadow of that night would follow him forever. Gwen Stacy's fall had changed him. It had changed the readers. It had changed Spider-Man's universe, both fictional and real, and it would shape every future version of his story. By the late 1970s, Peter Parker had grown accustomed to living in the long shadow of Gwen Stacy's death. The grief never fully left him, grief never does. But it softened around the edges, settling into a quiet ache he could live with. New York continued to move forward, and so did he. He reconnected with friends, buried himself in his studies, and tried, cautiously, to open his heart again. Mary Jane Watson's presence became more constant, her warmth filling spaces Peter had long believed would remain empty. She understood him in a way few ever did, seeing not only the mask but the wounded young man behind it. She did not ask him to forget Gwen. She simply stayed. The city itself was changing, too. Crime surged as economic strain tightened around New York's neighborhoods. Spider-Man found himself pulled deeper into battles that were less theatrical and more desperate. Drug epidemics, corruption, organized crime, dangers that could not be simply webbed up or punched away. Peter confronted the reality that being a hero often meant fighting problems with no easy solutions, problems that reflected the country's deeper turmoil. Yet he continued, because he had to. Because doing nothing would never again be an option. Amid these grounded struggles came new villains who posed threats the city had never seen before. The Hobgoblin emerged as a mysterious, ruthless successor to the Green Goblin's legacy, leaving Peter torn between the trauma of what Norman Osborn had done and the horrifying possibility that history was repeating itself. Kingpin expanded his criminal empire, weaving invisible threads of influence throughout New York. And then came stories like Kraven's Last Hunt, dark, psychological battles that pushed Peter to face the raw fragility of his own life. The 1980s were not gentle on heroes. But it was during this era, amid the darker tone of both society and comics themselves, that one of the most iconic transformations in Spider-Man's entire history began. It happened far from Queens. On an alien world, during a massive conflict known as the Secret Wars. Peter found himself transported across galaxies with other heroes and villains in a cosmic experiment he barely understood. They fought, survived, and adapted in ways none of them had imagined possible. Peter's suit was torn to shreds during a battle, and in search of replacement fabric, he stumbled into a chamber filled with strange alien technology. He grabbed what he believed was a simple machine, placing his hand into a dome of shifting energy. A black, fluid-like substance crept across his arm and enveloped him. For a moment, panic spiked in his chest, then the substance solidified into a sleek, black suit etched with a bold white spider emblem. It moved with him like skin. It responded to his thoughts. It generated its own webbing. It felt powerful. Liberating. He had no idea what it truly was. Back on Earth, the suit's abilities thrilled him. Swinging felt smoother. Strength felt sharper. His senses heightened. He told himself it was just technology as advanced as anything Reed Richards or Tony Stark used. Something clever, harmless. But at night, when exhaustion should have claimed him, Peter found himself waking up miles from where he remembered falling asleep. The suit would pull him out of his apartment, guiding his body through nighttime patrols while his mind drifted in silences he couldn't explain. He thought he was simply sleepwalking. He thought stress was finally catching up to him. He thought the grief he carried had twisted into something strange. Eventually he realized the truth: the suit wasn't fabric. It was alive. The Watcher, observing silently, recognized that this single discovery would echo across countless universes. This symbiote, a living alien organism seeking connection, would bind itself to Peter's soul more deeply than he ever intended. And once rejected, it would imprint itself on another mind hungrier for vengeance. In the real world, Spider-Man's black suit debut in 1984 electrified readers. Some loved the sleek new design, praising its modern edge. Others missed the classic red and blue costume. Marvel reveled in the divide: controversy meant attention, and attention meant sales. Behind the curtain, writers and artists debated how long the suit should remain. The story expanded, deepened, took on a life of its own, mirroring the symbiote's grip on Peter in the narrative. Peter's realization that the suit was manipulating him came slowly, painfully. He sought help from Reed Richards, who tested the material and uncovered its true nature. The symbiote wasn't aiding him, it was bonding to him, feeding on his adrenaline and emotions, and slowly eroding his will. Horrified, Peter rejected it, forcing the creature off his body with the pain of someone tearing away a part of themselves. The symbiote didn't want to let go. It slithered after him, trying desperately to reattach. Peter fled into the bell tower of a church, the symbiote screaming in frequencies only he could sense. When the bells rang, loud, violent vibrations, the creature writhed in agony, melting away from him in a heartrending moment of separation. Peter collapsed, exhausted and shaken. He believed the nightmare was over. But the symbiote survived. And it found someone else. Eddie Brock had lost everything he cared about: his job as a journalist, his reputation, his sense of identity. He blamed Spider-Man with a bitterness that festered into hatred. When the symbiote fused with him, their mutual resentment formed something monstrous: Venom. A creature with Peter's powers, Peter's secrets, and none of Peter's compassion. For the first time, Peter faced an enemy who knew him completely and wanted nothing but to break him. Meanwhile, in the real world, Venom's debut in 1988 became an instant sensation. The character embodied the edgier tone of late 80s comics: darker, angrier, more violent. Readers were captivated. Sales soared. And Spider-Man's mythos expanded further than anyone expected. The 1980s also marked a turning point in Peter's personal life. Amid the battles, heartbreaks, and near-constant strain, his relationship with Mary Jane deepened into something steady and trusting. She became a pillar in the storm, fearless in the face of his double life, unwavering in her support. She knew the dangers, the burdens, the sacrifices. But she loved him anyway. When Peter finally confessed everything, his grief over Gwen, his struggles as Spider-Man, his fear of losing anyone else, Mary Jane stayed. Their marriage in 1987 marked a new era for Peter Parker, one where love and responsibility coexisted. Readers followed the couple with fascination. Their relationship felt grounded, messy, human, just like everything about Spider-Man. Yet darkness never stayed far from Peter's world. The Kraven's Last Hunt storyline tested his will like never before. Kraven the Hunter, consumed by a lifelong obsession, defeated Spider-Man, replaced him, and ultimately took his own life. The psychological impact of that saga lingered, a reminder that Peter's world operated on emotional and moral complexities that few other heroes faced. Throughout the decade, society had grown accustomed to stories that were less idealistic and more reflective of real-world anxieties. Comics embraced difficult themes: violence, trauma, identity, existential dread. Spider-Man, who had always operated in the emotional realm of the human condition, fit naturally into this evolving landscape. His stories matured with his audience. He had become the hero readers grew up with, the symbol of perseverance they needed as they navigated their own adulthood. The Watcher observed all of this quietly, noting how Peter's journey during these years shaped not only him but the entire fabric of the multiverse. The idea of symbiotes, for instance, would not remain contained to Peter and Eddie. Across infinite universes, countless variants of these creatures would emerge. Some heroic, some monstrous, some tragic. The Black Suit storyline didn't just alter Peter's life, it sent ripples into the cosmic web that would redefine entire worlds. By the end of the 1980s, Spider-Man stood more complex than ever, a hero shaped not by victory, but by survival. He had lost people he loved, confronted his darkest impulses, endured battles that tested his identity, and rebuilt his life with someone who understood the weight he carried. Through it all, the boy from Queens continued to rise every time he fell, holding tight to the belief that doing good mattered, even when the world seemed determined to crush that hope. He didn't know it yet, but the next decade would challenge him in ways he had never imagined. New threats. New mysteries. New emotional upheavals. And one particular storyline, one that would divide fans, editors, and creators alike, would push him to the edge of his identity. The web was about to tangle itself into chaos. And Peter Parker was about to face the truth that even heroes can question who they are. The 1990s arrived with a restless energy in New York, and Peter Parker felt it everywhere, from the pulsing noise of the city streets to the shifting rhythms of his own life. He had survived the turbulence of the 80s, symbiotes, psychological warfare, and near-death experiences, and had emerged with Mary Jane by his side. Their marriage brought him a sense of stability he hadn't known since childhood, a fragile but precious balance between responsibility and love. He clung to it, believing that perhaps a new decade could offer him something resembling peace. But peace was never something Peter got to keep for long. As he juggled work at the Daily Bugle, graduate studies, and his nightly duties as Spider-Man, he sensed a strange, growing tension in the world around him. Crime fluctuated with new intensity. Rumors circulated in the city about shadowy figures and mysterious disappearances. And beneath it all, Peter began to feel an unsettling sensation, something from his past stirring like a ghost that refused to stay buried. It began subtly. A familiar face glimpsed in a crowd. A voice he thought he recognized echoing down an alley. Then, one night, Spider-Man confronted a figure whose movements mirrored his own with uncanny precision. Their fight felt like a distorted reflection. Every strike, dodge, and web shot matched perfectly. When the figure ripped off his mask, Peter stared into his own face. A clone. The revelation shook him in ways few battles ever had. This double, this perfect copy, claimed to be Ben Reilly, created years earlier by the deranged scientist Miles Warren, known as the Jackal. Ben had believed himself to be the real Peter until the truth shattered him. Instead of fighting for identity, he had disappeared, forging a new life far from New York. Now he returned because something had pulled him back, a sense that the world was sliding toward crisis, and that Peter needed him. The Watcher observed the moment quietly, aware of the storm it would unleash, not just in Peter's universe, but in the real world, where readers would grapple with emotional whiplash, editorial controversy, and a storyline that would become one of the most debated in comic history. For Peter, the return of Ben Reilly was like reopening an old wound. Seeing an exact duplicate of himself, same memories, same trauma, same guilt, forced him to question everything he believed about identity. Who was he, truly? What defined a person when every memory, every formative moment, could be replicated? Ben wasn't an imposter. He was another life branching from the same root. But while Peter wrestled with existential questions, the world around him spun into chaos. The Jackal resurfaced, more unhinged than ever, unleashing an army of clones. Some twisted, some incomplete, some eerily perfect. Friends and foes alike were caught in the crossfire. The city buzzed with rumors of genetic manipulation. Even Peter's closest relationships became tangled in suspicion and fear. Then came the revelation that nearly broke him. Tests suggested that he, the Peter Parker who had lived, fought, loved, and mourned, might be the clone. The real Peter, according to the results, was Ben Reilly. The shock rippled through every part of his life. Suddenly, memories he held sacred felt compromised. Achievements he felt proud of became uncertain. Even his marriage to Mary Jane trembled beneath the weight of doubt. If he wasn't the original, did he even deserve the life he'd built? Mary Jane stood by him with a conviction that steadied him. She didn't care which Peter was real. She cared about the man she loved. The one who came home exhausted, who comforted her in her fears, who carried the weight of his uncle's death like a scar across his heart. She reminded him that identity was forged through choices, not genetics. But Peter couldn't shake the unease. In the real world, the clone saga exploded across Spider-Man comics throughout the mid-1990s. Fans were confused, then upset. The story dragged on, longer, more convoluted, more chaotic than intended. Behind the scenes, editorial teams shifted, rewrites accumulated, and narrative direction changed repeatedly. What began as a bold attempt to explore identity spiraled into one of the most controversial comic arcs ever printed. Inside the story, Ben tried to help Peter through the turmoil, functioning not as an adversary, but as a brother. He adopted the identity of Scarlet Spider, wearing a makeshift costume of vibrant red and blue with a sleeveless hoodie. A look readers would either love or hate, but never forget. He fought criminals, saved innocents, and tried to lighten Peter's load in a life that rarely allowed kindness. Yet Peter's emotional state deteriorated. The constant uncertainty, the endless battles, and the revelation that Mary Jane was pregnant pushed him to the brink. If he truly was a clone, he reasoned, then perhaps stepping back would protect the people he loved. Ben could take up the mantle of Spider-Man while Peter focused on fatherhood. For the first time since he was 15, Peter considered giving up the mask. The moment was bittersweet. He wasn't abandoning responsibility, he believed he was fulfilling it in a different way. Ben, understanding the magnitude of the decision, reluctantly accepted the role. He swung through New York wearing a new Spider-Man suit, sleek and slightly altered, bearing the weight of a legacy he both shared and admired. But destiny in Peter Parker's world has never been simple. The cloning crisis escalated into madness. The Jackal pushed his experiments further. Unexpected enemies emerged. And Norman Osborn, long believed dead, returned in a shocking twist that stunned both Peter and readers across the country. His reappearance shattered the foundation of the clone saga. Osborn had orchestrated much of the chaos from the shadows, manipulating science, identities, and lives with cold precision. The truth finally came out during a violent confrontation: Peter Parker was the real one. The test results that had shaken him were fabricated, a deliberate psychological attack by Osborn to destabilize him. Ben Reilly, in the end, was the clone. The truth struck like a hammer. Peter felt relief, guilt, and sadness collide inside him. Ben had lived believing he wasn't real, had built a life on uncertainty, had stepped up to protect the world when Peter faltered. None of that diminished his humanity. Ben's final act was one of pure heroism. In the fight against Osborn, he sacrificed himself to save Peter. As he died, his body began to break down, the unmistakable decay of a clone nearing its biological limit. But his final words carried no bitterness, only acceptance. He was glad to know who he was, even in the end. Peter held him as he died, mourning a brother he had barely known but deeply loved. In the real world, fans felt a similar mix of relief and exhaustion. The Clone Saga had dominated Spider-Man comics for over 2 years. It had become a symbol of 1990s comic excess, overly long, editorially chaotic, and emotionally turbulent. Yet it also left a lasting mark. Ben Reilly became a cult favorite. The themes of identity and self-worth resonated with readers long after the storyline ended. With the saga finally over, Peter returned to his life with renewed clarity. He was Spider-Man. Flawed, human, resilient. He had faced one of the most destabilizing crises of his existence and come out stronger. The experience reminded him that being Spider-Man was not about being the original or the best. It was about showing up, about doing the right thing even when the world fell apart around him. As the decade drew to a close, Peter stepped into the future with Mary Jane, carrying both grief and hope. They prepared for the arrival of their child. Though fate would twist that hope in painful ways still to come. The 1990s, a decade defined by chaos, excess, and reinvention, had transformed Peter Parker in ways no villain ever could. The Watcher observed the closing years with quiet acknowledgement. The Clone Saga had created fractures and possibilities across the multiverse. Countless worlds formed with Ben Reilly as the true Spider-Man, with Peter as the clone, or with entirely different interpretations of identity and history. The web had grown more tangled, more unpredictable, more expansive. And the next decade, one powered by cinematic breakthroughs, ultimate reboots, and the birth of a new Spider-Man entirely, would transform the Spider-Verse again. Peter Parker had survived the storm. But a new era was waiting. The world Peter Parker lived in had changed dramatically since his earliest days swinging through Queens. By the dawn of the new millennium, the city around him seemed louder, faster, and more interconnected than ever before. Technology reshaped daily life. New threats emerged from every corner of society. And Peter himself had grown into adulthood, carrying the burdens of countless battles, losses, and fleeting victories. The 1990s had tested him, broken him in places, and rebuilt him in others. Now, as the 2000s opened, he entered a new era with a sense of experience he had never possessed before. But while Peter continued his journey in the main Marvel universe, a different version of him was preparing to be born elsewhere, one who wouldn't carry decades of continuity, one who would speak to a new generation living in a world that looked nothing like the one Stan Lee and Steve Ditko had written into existence in 1962. The Real War. LD needed another Spider-Man, one who reflected the anxieties and hopes of the modern age. And so Marvel made a creative gamble they hadn't attempted in years. They created an entirely new universe. They called it the Ultimate Universe. It began as an experiment in accessibility. For decades, comics had grown dense with history, too dense, many believed, for new readers to jump into without feeling lost. The legendary stories that shaped Peter. Gwen's death, his marriage to Mary Jane, the Clone Saga, were integral to his character, but they were also overwhelming for someone encountering Spider-Man for the first time. Marvel's editorial team understood this and sought a reset, not by replacing Peter, but by presenting him anew. Ultimate Spider-Man launched in 2000 with a story that felt familiar but refreshed. Here was a Peter Parker who wasn't weighed down by decades of narrative baggage. He was a teenager again. Awkward, brilliant, overwhelmed. But the world that shaped him was different, more digital, more diverse, more complicated. His school hallways were filled with modern voices, his world touched by contemporary issues, his relationships rendered with emotional nuance that resonated deeply with readers growing up in a rapidly shifting era. Inside the narrative of Earth 1610, this new Peter Parker discovered his powers not in the classic atomic age lab, but in a modern, cutting-edge research facility backed by a corporation with reach and ambition. Osborne Industries, sleek and cold, replaced small-time scientific experiments with genetically engineered supersoldier formulas and breakthroughs that bordered on the unethical. The spider that bit him was no accident, it was the byproduct of corporate ambition. This Peter was uncertain about his place in the world even before he developed powers. He lived in a home held together by Aunt May's patience and devotion. He struggled with bullies, grades, and friendships just as the original Peter had, but the modern context sharpened those struggles in new ways. And when he became Spider-Man, his journey wasn't simply an echo of the past, it was a reimagining for a generation that had inherited a world more complex than the one their parents grew up in. The Watcher observed this new universe with particular curiosity. It was not merely another alternate timeline. It was born with intention, structure, and modern design. It wasn't a natural multiversal branch, it was a deliberate one, built by creators to explore what Spider-Man meant in an age of globalization, smartphones, and corporate power. Readers embraced the new version with unexpected enthusiasm. Writer Brian Michael Bendis and artist Mark Bagley built a long, emotionally grounded run that explored Peter's psyche with subtlety and humanity. His early victories felt intimate. His failures felt devastating. He wasn't burdened by the mythic status of a decades-old hero, he earned his legacy issue by issue, mistake by mistake. Meanwhile, in the main Marvel universe, Peter Parker continued his life as an adult hero. His marriage to Mary Jane, his career as a photographer and later a teacher, his battles with the remnants of his past, they all continued in parallel. Yet behind the scenes, Marvel's editorial team began to feel tension. Some believed Peter should remain married. Others felt he should return to the relatability of youth. The disagreements would eventually lead to a controversial storyline that altered the fabric of his continuity, One More Day, but that storm had not yet arrived. In the Ultimate Universe, Peter grew into his role with earnest sincerity. His friendships with Mary Jane, Gwen Stacy, and others formed the emotional core of the story. The modernized villains he faced, Kingpin as a corporate titan, the Green Goblin as a hulking monstrosity, Dr. Octopus reimagined through contemporary science, challenged him in ways that tested his courage and compassion. But the Ultimate Universe was never meant to be static. Tragedy and transformation were woven into its DNA from the start. And eventually, its Spider-Man reached a point no Spider-Man had ever reached before in mainstream continuity. He died. In 2011, the Ultimate Peter Parker sacrificed himself protecting his neighborhood, his family, and the people he loved. His death was not sensationalized or cheap. It was told with solemnity, grief, and love, a conclusion to a journey that felt complete yet heartbreaking. Readers mourned him deeply because they had watched him grow from page one. He had become their Spider-Man. In universe, the Watcher felt the tremor ripple across the multiverse. A Spider-Man had fallen, not to cosmic beings, not to abstract dangers, but to the raw reality of a battle fought close to home. And as always, tragedy opened the way for transformation. Because the Ultimate Universe did not leave the mask empty. In the aftermath of Peter's death, its shockwaves still shaking the hearts of those who loved him, a new teenager stepped hesitantly into the narrative, Miles Morales. But Miles did not begin as Spider-Man. He began as a boy trying to understand the weight of expectations, the pressures of identity, and the complex world around him. His father's distrust of vigilantes, his mother's encouragement, his Uncle Aaron's dangerous charisma, each thread wove into a portrait of a young man navigating conflicting influences. His spider bite came unexpectedly, echoing Peter's origin but not mirroring it. Miles didn't want powers. He didn't want danger. He didn't want the legacy thrust upon him. And when he first tried to act, he stumbled, terrified, confused, desperate not to be noticed. It wasn't until Peter Parker died that Miles understood the meaning of responsibility. His grief became his catalyst. His fear became his motivation. And the world, still mourning, slowly began to accept him. Not as a replacement for Peter, but as a Spider-Man in his own right. Meanwhile, back in the real world, Miles' creation was driven by something deeper than narrative convenience. The world was changing. Comic readers were changing. Audiences were younger, more diverse, more reflective of cultures that the original 1962 Peter Parker could not have represented. Marvel sought to expand the Spider-Man mythos to better mirror the world outside the comics. Miles was not designed to erase Peter. He was designed to continue what Peter represented: hope, compassion, courage, and the belief that anyone, could rise to become something greater. His arrival marked a turning point in comic history. Some readers resisted the change. Many more embraced it. And slowly, almost quietly, Miles Morales became one of the most important heroes of his generation. By 2011, Spider-Man existed in multiple universes, each version reflecting different eras, different struggles, different identities. Peter Parker in Earth 616 continued his adult heroism. Peter Parker in Earth 1610 had completed his journey. Miles Morales emerged as a new voice for a new age. The web of destiny stretched wider, more intricate, more beautiful than ever before. The Watcher gazed at the expanding tapestry with understanding. The story of Spider-Man had always been about adaptation, about overcoming, changing, growing. And now the multiverse reflected that truth in ways no creator in 1962 could have foreseen. The world was ready for new stories. The multiverse was ready for new heroes. And soon, the Spider-Verse itself would awaken, bringing together every thread, every destiny, every Spider-Person in a way the cosmos had never seen. But before that convergence, one final shift in the real world would change Spider-Man forever. The rise of cinematic universes, the blending of reality and fiction, and the cultural rebirth that would transform Spider-Man from a beloved comic character into a global icon whose stories touched billions. The new millennium had given birth to one Spider-Man and resurrected another. The next decade would make them legends. The story of Spider-Man, by this moment in the timeline, had become something far larger than the life of one boy from Queens. What began in 1962 as a reluctant teenager in a homemade costume had evolved, stretched, transformed, and multiplied across decades. Peter Parker had grown from an insecure high school student into a man forged by loss and responsibility. He had fought villains born of science, tragedy, obsession, and madness. He had fallen in love, married, lost friends, gained new ones, and repeatedly carried burdens heavier than any normal person could bear. The Watcher, observing from the quiet edges of reality, saw how each era carved a different shape into the myth. The early years gave Peter his foundation, his innocence, his guilt, his sense of duty. The 1970s stripped that innocence away, brutal and unflinching, forcing him to confront the reality that sometimes heroes lose the people they love most. The 1980s tested his identity, binding him to alien organisms and dragging him through psychological crucibles until he understood not only what he could do, but who he was when everything familiar collapsed. The 1990s torn at the very essence of his existence, questioning his past, his memories, even his humanity, until Peter learned that identity is more than biology or destiny. It is choice. Through all of this, the real world shaped him as much as the fiction did. Readers changed, and Spider-Man changed with them. Social landscapes shifted. Views on heroism evolved. Audiences began craving stories that were more emotional, more personal, more reflective of their own lives. And so Peter adapted. His creators reimagined him, reinterpreted him, rewrote him, not to replace who he was, but to refine what he meant. Then came the Ultimate Universe. In that continuity, the myth was cleaned to its essentials and filtered through the anxieties of a new century. A younger Peter, more introspective, more vulnerable, forged a legacy free from the weight of decades. His life, though familiar, unfolded along new emotional pathways. His relationships deepened with modern nuance. His struggles resonated with readers living in a world more interconnected and unstable than the one that birthed the original Spider-Man. And then that Peter died. With his death, the universe trembled. It felt, even across fictional boundaries, like saying goodbye to a reflection of one's own youth. But grief, as it had always done in Spider-Man's story, made space for change. Miles Morales rose from that grief, a new teenager with his own fears, his own strengths, his own wounds. He didn't replace Peter, he expanded the meaning of the mask. He showed that the legacy of Spider-Man was not a single path, but a mantle that could be worn by anyone brave enough to shoulder responsibility despite fear. So where does the universe stand now? At this midpoint in the chronicle, Spider-Man exists in more than one world. Peter Parker lives in the main Marvel continuity, older and wiser. Another Peter Parker has fallen, leaving behind a city that still whispers his name. Miles Morales steps toward the destiny he never asked for. And somewhere deep in the cosmic web, countless other threads begin vibrating brighter, louder, as realities draw closer together than they've ever been. Because the world beyond the comics is changing again. Technology is exploding. Storytelling mediums are merging. Film studios are preparing to redefine what heroes look like. And in the background, artists, writers, and fans are beginning to explore an idea so vast it could reframe the entire mythos. The possibility of not just one universe of Spider-Man stories, but an infinite number, each interconnected, each meaningful, each bound by threads of fate. The watcher senses these shifts like faint tremors in the web. A storm is gathering, one that will pull together every version of Spider-Man ever imagined, comic, cinematic, animated, and more, into a tapestry no single creator could ever fully control. It is a convergence born not of one world, but of a global culture embracing the idea that Spider-Man belongs to everyone, in every form. For now, though, the story rests in a delicate transition. Peter Parker's legacy is secure but changing. Miles Morales is just stepping into the light. The multiverse is stirring in its sleep, waiting for the moment when the strands will collide. And the real world is approaching a cultural explosion that will propel Spider-Man into unprecedented heights. The web is about to widen. The mask is about to multiply. And the Spider-Verse, the true Spider-Verse, lies just beyond the next turn. The death of Peter Parker in the Ultimate Universe left a silence that felt heavier than any villain's attack or cosmic catastrophe. It wasn't the kind of silence filled with dramatic tension or explosive promise. It was the quiet ache of a community that had lost its protector, of friends who had lost a brother, and of readers who had watched a young hero grow from his very first steps into something remarkable. For the people inside Earth 1610, Peter had been more than a masked vigilante. He had been a symbol of resilience and heart. And for the readers outside the panels, he had become a new kind of reflection, one shaped by the anxieties and complexities of the 21st century. The universe mourned him. His neighborhood gathered to honor a boy they hadn't always understood but had ultimately come to love. Aunt May, broken but proud, carried the weight of a loss she had lived through in too many forms. Gwen Stacy stood beside her, older and harder than the girl who had died in another reality, but still marked by grief sewn into her bones. Mary Jane, heart in pieces, tried to put into words what Peter had meant to the world, not realizing that her voice would resonate across the multiverse. And somewhere in that crowd, unremarkable, unnoticed, stood a boy who carried his own secret guilt. Miles Morales. Miles wasn't certain how to mourn someone he had never truly known. He had admired Spider-Man from a distance, watched the news clips with awe, and tried to imitate the hero's poses when no one was looking. But admiration came with the sting of regret. Miles had been given powers by accident, an unexpected bite from a genetically altered spider stolen by his Uncle Aaron, a man whose charisma masked dangerous choices. Miles hadn't wanted the powers. He hadn't asked for them. He hadn't understood them. And when they came, he had frozen. Froze when he should have acted. Froze when he might have helped. Froze when, perhaps, he could have made a difference. Miles didn't know if he could have saved Peter Parker. He didn't let himself believe it, but he also didn't let himself forget the possibility. That uncertainty became the seed of something heavy inside him, something that felt like responsibility but tasted like guilt. The Watcher noticed it forming long before Miles understood it. The threads of the web of life and destiny have patterns, rhythms, echoes. Where Peter Parker had once stood in the center of a cosmic convergence, now a new vibration pulsed quietly in the background. A new spider, not meant to replicate, but to evolve the legacy. Miles tried to return to normal life, though normality was something that seemed to crumble in his hands no matter how tightly he held it. His father, Jefferson, pushed him to succeed academically, determined to steer his son away from the pitfalls that had swallowed many in their neighborhood. And swallowed Aaron, Jefferson's brother, more than once. His mother, Rio, anchored the family with gentle assurance, believing in Miles even when he struggled to believe in himself. But the powers he had, camouflage, venom strikes, agility, heightened senses, did not fade. They lingered like an unanswered question. And every time he saw a headline about Spider-Man's death, every time he passed a mural or overheard someone grieving, that question pressed harder into his heart. If you have power and do nothing, what does that make you? The world weighed on him in a way no 13-year-old should have to carry. His father told him superheroes caused more trouble than they solved. His uncle Aaron whispered temptation into his ear, offering misguided wisdom wrapped in charm. Miles felt caught between two worlds, one telling him to stay invisible, the other urging him to step forward. But it was when he visited Peter Parker's home. Quietly, anonymously, lingering at the edge of the crowd, that everything changed. He saw Aunt May speaking to a small group of children, telling them that Peter had been brave not because he was strong, but because he chose to help. She said that anyone could choose compassion, anyone could make a difference, anyone could wear the mask. Those words struck Miles like a bolt of lightning. Anyone could wear the mask. He didn't know if she meant it. He didn't know if Peter's spirit would approve. But he felt something shift inside him, something that had been waiting quietly, patiently, for its moment to emerge. When Miles first put on the black suit, hastily purchased and ill-fitting, he didn't feel powerful. He felt terrified. The city skyline seemed larger, sharper, more threatening than he had ever imagined. His first attempts at web-swinging were clumsy. His first attempts at fighting crime left him bruised and gasping. But the instinct was there. The spark Peter had carried now flickered inside Miles. The response from the city was not gentle. People were angry. They accused Miles of disrespecting Peter's memory. They told him he had no right to wear the suit, no right to pretend to be a hero. Some even called him a fraud. And in many ways, Miles believed them. He felt like an imposter wearing the costume of a legend. But destiny doesn't wait for permission. As he grew more confident, Miles crossed paths with heroes who recognized something in him that he couldn't yet see in himself. Jessica Drew, a clone of Peter in the Ultimate Universe, saw his fear but also his sincerity. She guided him, taught him, tested him. And eventually, she acknowledged him, not as a replacement, but as a Spider-Man in his own right. When Captain America saw Miles trying to help during a crisis, he didn't scold him. He didn't question his motives. He looked at him and said, "You're just a kid, but a kid with heart. Don't waste it." And for a boy who had spent his life trying to meet expectations, those words felt like a spark igniting dry leaves. Miles' path was not easy. It was filled with doubt, loss, mistakes, and the lingering fear that he would never measure up to Peter Parker. But every time he failed, he got back up. Every time he faltered, he learned. Every time he questioned himself, he remembered the mural of Peter looking down on the city he loved. Miles Morales was never meant to be Peter Parker. He was meant to be something new. Something the universe needed. Something the real world was waiting for. Because outside the page, Marvel had created Miles not to replace Peter, but to expand the mythos, to show that heroism is not confined to one identity, one background, one story. Miles resonated with readers around the world. His humility, his uncertainty, his love for his community, and his cultural identity made him relatable in ways that enriched the Spider-Man legacy rather than rewriting it. The world embraced him slowly at first, then passionately. His stories gained emotional weight. His relationships grew deeper. And as the 2010s unfolded, Marvel began weaving him more tightly into the expanding tapestry of the Spider-Verse, a tapestry that would soon shock the world with its brilliance. The Watcher could feel it coming. The multiverse, once quiet and distant, was beginning to stir. New versions of Spider-Man appeared across animated shows, video games, and upcoming films. Old versions resurfaced. Threads connected. Worlds aligned. Miles Morales was not only the new Spider-Man of Earth 1610. He was the herald of a coming storm. A storm that would bring together every Spider-Person across every universe. A storm that would rewrite the scale of the myth entirely. A storm called the Spider-Verse. By the early 2000s, the Spider-Man mythos had grown too vast, too emotionally rich, too culturally significant to remain confined to the printed page. The world had changed, and audiences had begun gravitating toward a new kind of storytelling, one where heroes leapt from paper to screen, their struggles magnified by music, movement, and the collective gasp of a theater filled with strangers sharing the same dream. And in 2002, the world witnessed a moment that would redefine not only Spider-Man, but the entire future of superhero storytelling, the arrival of the first major Spider-Man film. When Tobey Maguire stepped onto the screen as Peter Parker, the character was reborn in a form that billions would come to recognize. His portrayal wasn't flashy or ironic. It wasn't made of winks or quips. It was sincere, earnest, and filled with a quiet vulnerability that echoed the spirit of the comic's earliest days. Under Sam Raimi's direction, the story embraced emotion as its anchor. Raimi treated Peter Parker's transformation not as a spectacle but as a deeply human experience. Viewers watched Peter grapple with loneliness, responsibility, and the weight of choices that shaped his life. The famous line, "With great power comes great responsibility," became more than a moral. It became a promise stitched into the modern cultural fabric. The Watcher felt a ripple spread across the multiverse. It was subtle at first, a faint trembling of strands as millions of hearts connected with a singular portrayal. But slowly, the ripple grew. Across worlds, the image of Spider-Man, his meaning, his tone, his emotional weight, began to shift, adapt, and accumulate strength. Stories were no longer limited to comic readers. They now reached across nations and languages, transcending boundaries in a way even Peter Parker himself could never have imagined. The cinematic Peter's struggles felt familiar to longtime fans, the joy of discovering power, the heartbreak of losing Uncle Ben, the tension of living between two identities, and the all-consuming love he held for Mary Jane Watson. But the film also introduced new rhythms. Organic webbing instead of mechanical shooters, heightened melodrama, and a visual aesthetic that blended comic book energy with classic romance. It felt timeless, and it made Spider-Man the heart of a new storytelling era. Raimi's trilogy evolved with Peter. The first film captured innocence and discovery. The second confronted doubt, sacrifice, and the crushing pressure of expectation. The third, though divisive, explored the dangers of darkness within and the fragile redemption that followed. Each film wove a new thread into the cultural web, shaping how countless viewers understood Spider-Man's emotional depth. For many, Tobey Maguire was Spider-Man, their first, their favorite, their benchmark. But time brings reinvention. And in 2012, a new chapter emerged from the ashes of a cancelled sequel. Andrew Garfield donned a mask in The Amazing Spider-Man, a portrayal that carried a different energy entirely. If Tobey's Peter was defined by sincerity, Andrew's was defined by raw emotion. His Peter Parker was a wounded young man, a boy grappling with abandonment, love, and the burning need to know why his parents vanished. The tone shifted to something more modern, sharper, tinged with melancholy and intensity. Viewers connected with Garfield's Peter for different reasons. He felt like the version of Peter shaped by the early 2010s, quieter, more introspective, always searching for answers. His relationship with Gwen Stacy, played with genuine warmth and chemistry, became the emotional heart of the films. Their connection felt fragile and real, built on trust, curiosity, and the knowledge that their world was dangerous. When Gwen fell, mirroring a tragedy from decades earlier, the universe trembled with a familiar ache. But Garfield's Peter carried that grief differently, visibly, openly, unable to hide the cracks spreading through him. Though the series did not continue beyond 2 films, Andrew Garfield's Spider-Man left a legacy of its own. He portrayed a deeply human Peter, a hero who loved fiercely, hurt visibly, and fought not just for justice, but for connection. His story was incomplete, cut short by corporate decisions rather than narrative design, yet his emotional resonance endured. Across the multiverse, that resonance mattered. Then came a seismic shift. In 2016, Spider-Man entered the Marvel Cinematic Universe. And with him came Tom Holland, a Peter Parker who blended the boyish charm of the comics' early days with the frantic energy of a teenager overwhelmed by a world too big for him. Holland's Peter lived in a universe crowded with gods, soldiers, and geniuses. He was younger than any cinematic Peter before him, still learning calculus, still tripping over his own shoes, still desperate for approval from someone who could guide him. His mentor became Tony Stark. An unexpected pairing that modernized Peter's journey. In this version, responsibility was not only a moral lesson but a test of maturity in a universe threatened by cosmic forces. Holland's Peter wanted to prove himself, not for fame, but because he believed he could help. His optimism was refreshing. His mistakes felt relatable. His growth was gradual, shaped by humility rather than tragedy. The Watcher observed this development closely. Holland's arrival realigned the multiverse. For the first time, Peter Parker stood shoulder to shoulder with the icons of a broader mythos, proving that even amid Titans, Spider-Man's heart was indispensable. But the most extraordinary convergence occurred in 2021, when No Way Home tore open the fabric of cinematic continuity. It brought together 3 generations of Spider-Man, 3 interpretations of Peter Parker, each shaped by different eras, different audiences, different struggles. Tobey Maguire returned as an older, wiser Peter, carrying the calm maturity of someone who had seen too much but still believed in hope. Andrew Garfield returned as a wounded Peter, burdened by guilt but desperate to redeem himself. And Tom Holland stood between them, learning, growing, understanding that legacy is not a straight line, but a web of shared pain and triumph. When these 3 stood together on screen, the multiverse in every sense, fictional, cultural, emotional, snapped into alignment. Their shared losses, shared humor, shared humanity created a moment that transcended storytelling. Across theaters worldwide, audiences gasped, cried, and cheered, not merely for action, but for reconciliation, redemption, and unity. That convergence did something unprecedented. It canonized the Spider-Verse in the minds of millions. It told the world that every Spider-Man mattered. Every interpretation was valid. Every version contributed to the legacy. The Watcher felt the tremor of that realization shudder across infinite strands of the web of life and destiny. What had once been scattered continuities now glowed with connection. The multiverse had become part of the mainstream vocabulary of Spider-Man stories, not an obscure concept, but a central truth. And yet, even as live-action Spider-Man reached new heights, an even greater revolution brewed quietly in animation. A revolution that would reshape Spider-Man's storytelling in ways no one, not even the Watcher, could fully predict. That story had begun in 2018. And it would soon explode into the greatest Spider-Man narrative ever told. But that belongs to the next chapter. As the mid-2010s unfolded, the Spider-Man mythos stood on the edge of transformation. The movies had redefined Peter Parker's image for global audiences, Miles Morales had breathed new life into what it meant to wear the mask, and the multiverse had begun stirring with whispered promises of crossover and convergence. But all of that was merely a prelude to a creative shift that would unravel the very fabric of Spider-Man's storytelling and reveal the vastness of the web that lay beneath. It began quietly, in the pages of the comics. A subtle hum, a vibration in the threads of continuity, as the boundaries between different versions of Spider-Man thinned. The Watcher noticed the first tremors long before the characters did. He could feel the tension forming in the web of life and destiny, ancient, intricate, stretching across infinite universes like silk woven from possibility itself. Something was moving along its strands. Something hungry. Peter Parker, in the main Marvel universe, was slowly rebuilding his life after years of turmoil. He had lost time, literally, as Dr. Octopus hijacked his body during the infamous Superior Spider-Man saga, forcing Peter's consciousness into limbo while Ock attempted to live as a more efficient, more ruthless Spider-Man. When Peter finally returned to himself, the world had changed in ways he could barely reconcile. His relationships were strained. His sense of identity was fractured. His place in the universe felt strange and unsteady. But even as Peter tried to regain his footing, something else began happening, something far beyond the petty criminal schemes of New York. Spider-People across other realities started disappearing. One by one, entire universes began losing their spider heroes with no explanation. Some fell in battle to impossible foes. Others simply went silent. And then the truth emerged. The Inheritors. A family of immortal, vampiric beings who fed not on blood, but on the essence of spider totems, the spiritual energy connecting every spider person across the multiverse. These beings traversed realities, eliminating Spider-Man after Spider-Man, consuming their life force like predators clearing a forest of prey. They were ancient, unstoppable, and driven by a hunger that felt woven into the web itself. For the first time, the multiverse began collapsing inward, not by accident or cosmic oversight, but by design. The Inheritors were hunting every spider they could find, and Peter Parker, Earth 616's original, stood at the center of their target. The awakening of the Spider-Verse began not with triumph, but with fear. When the survivors finally gathered, dragged through portals, plucked from collapsing timelines, rescued at the brink of annihilation, they found themselves staring across an impossible assembly. Hundreds of spider heroes, each shaped by their own world's rules and tragedies, stood together for the first time. Some were dark, brooding figures hardened by loss. Others were light-hearted, sculpted by worlds of humor or absurdity. Some were warriors. Some were scientists. Some were children, still learning the meaning of power and consequence. Spider-Gwen, recently transformed from an alternate Gwen Stacy into her world's primary spider hero, arrived with fierce independence forged by trauma. Peter Parker of her world had been the one to fall, and Gwen carried that wound with a fire no villain could extinguish. Peter Parker Noir emerged from the shadows, trench coat fluttering like a flag of defiance. His world was black and white, shaped by Depression-era brutality, yet he carried himself with dignity and resolve. Penny Parker brought something entirely new into the mythos, a young girl bonded with a psychic mech suit, her story tinged with anime flavor and futuristic wonder. And then there was Peter Porker, the spectacular Spider-Ham, an anthropomorphic cartoon pig whose existence should have been impossible, yet somehow made perfect sense. His humor disguised real strength, one forged in a world where physics bowed to punchlines. But perhaps the most important arrival was Miles Morales. He stepped into the assembly carrying the fresh weight of Peter Parker's legacy on his shoulders. He was younger than many, newer to the mask, but his presence resonated with a quiet determination. He represented the future, an evolution of what Spider-Man could become. When these disparate heroes looked at one another, they understood something profound. Spider-Man was not a single identity, but a pattern. A spirit. A story the multiverse loved to tell, again and again, in infinite variations. The Watcher saw this convergence not as coincidence, but as cosmic truth. The web of life and destiny had always connected these threads. Now the strands were visible, glowing with purpose. The war that followed was unlike anything the Spider-Man mythos had ever seen. Battles unfolded across worlds, apocalyptic wastelands, cartoon dimensions, futuristic cities, universes bathed in neon light or crumbling under entropy. Spider-Men and Spider-Women fought side by side, each contributing their unique gifts. Peter, older and wiser, emerged as the natural leader not because of power, but because of compassion. He guided the younger ones. He reassured the frightened. He built connections where none existed before. The Inheritors were relentless. They struck with monstrous ferocity, tearing through timelines, devouring life forces, nearly bringing the entire Spider-Verse to its knees. But the unity of the spider-heroes proved stronger than their hunger. In the end, the multiverse triumphed, not through one lone victory, but through collective resilience. And something extraordinary happened. The Spider-Verse did not return to isolation. Once connected, the web refused to let the strands drift apart. The awareness remained. Each spider-person carried the memory of others like them, the knowledge that they were not alone, that their pain and hope mirrored countless versions across reality. It was a comforting truth, one that enriched the mythos in ways no comic event before it had done. Spider-Man, for the first time, became not only a hero, but a legacy shared by infinite worlds. In the real world, readers embraced the Spider-Verse event with enthusiasm and fascination. Its scale was unprecedented. Its creativity seemed boundless. And its emotional core, rooted in shared burden and shared resilience, gave it weight beyond multiversal spectacle. Fans debated their favorite alternate spider-heroes. Gwen Stacy's transformation into Spider-Gwen became iconic overnight. Miles Morales gained even more prominence. And the concept of the Spider-Verse sparked imaginations across every corner of the fandom. But even this expansive comic event was only the beginning. In 2018, something happened that no one fully expected. A film arrived that didn't merely depict the Spider-Verse, it redefined it. It transcended it. It elevated it into an artistic masterpiece that felt less like an adaptation and more like a revelation. Spider-Man, Into the Spider-Verse. But that is the story of the next chapter, a chapter that would forever change how the world saw Spider-Man, animation, and the infinite possibilities of the multiverse. For now, the Spider-Verse stood awakened, breathing, alive. And its greatest evolution was yet to come. By the time 2018 arrived, the Spider-Man mythos had grown into something nearly unrecognizable from the humble story that began in 1962. Peter Parker had lived and died and lived again in countless interpretations. Miles Morales had stepped into the spotlight as a modern, emotionally grounded Spider-Man for a new generation. The Spider-Verse event in the comics had awakened multiversal awareness among fans and characters alike. And cinema had introduced three distinct live-action Spider-Men, each shaping the public imagination in profoundly different ways. Yet even after all of this, nothing truly prepared the world for what came next. The first whispers were modest, an animated Spider-Man movie was coming. It wasn't tied to the Marvel Cinematic Universe. It wasn't continuing the Raimi or Webb timelines. It wasn't connected to Tom Holland's youthful Peter. It existed on its own, in a medium that some studios still underestimated. Animation, after all, was too often dismissed as something safer, lighter, not meant for the heavy emotional weight Spider-Man carried. But these whispers became a roar when the film arrived. Spider-Man, Into the Spider-Verse hit theaters with a kinetic burst of color and sound that felt less like a movie and more like a pulse through the cultural bloodstream. It didn't just tell a story. It reinvented how stories could be told. Miles Morales stepped onto the screen not as a footnote or a successor, but as the beating heart of a universe all his own. His world was vibrant, stylized, infused with music and motion that mirrored the energy of his personality, young, unsure, overwhelmed, but full of quiet strength waiting to be recognized. The film followed him through the weight of expectations, the tension between family and independence, the complexity of living in two cultures, and the confusion of adolescence amplified by powers he didn't understand. He wasn't just a new Spider-Man. He was Spider-Man. The animation style reflected this evolution with bold confidence, comic book textures, motion smears, glitch effects, graffiti-like visuals, kinetic cuts, and rhythms that felt alive. It wasn't bound by realism but embraced its medium fully, honoring the aesthetic of sequential art while pushing its boundaries. This wasn't a film that adapted comics. It was a film that became a comic in motion. The watcher observed with interest as this artistic choice vibrated across the multiverse. The film didn't merely depict alternate realities, it invited the audience into them. When Peter B. Parker stumbled into Miles' world as a mentor broken by time and failure, viewers saw shades of every older, wearier Peter ever written. When Spider-Gwen arrived with athletic grace and hidden pain, she became a symbol of independence, loss, and empowerment. When Spider-Man Noir, Penny Parker, and Spider-Ham appeared, they blended absurdity with sincerity, reminding everyone that even the strangest stories hold truths worth telling. The multiverse blossomed on screen not as a convoluted concept, but as a celebration of individuality. Every Spider-Person represented a different way of grappling with responsibility, grief, fear, and hope. Their differences didn't divide them, they enriched them. The heart of the film was simple yet profound: anyone can wear the mask. And Miles proved it. His transformation, from a hesitant boy trying to fit into someone else's legacy to a confident hero forging his own, resonated deeply. When he stood atop a building, breath steadying, music rising, and leapt into the unknown, the world felt the weightlessness with him. That moment, frozen between fear and courage, became an instant modern myth. The watcher understood the significance of that leap. A new fixed point formed in the web of life and destiny, not one of tragedy, like Gwen Stacy's fall, but of empowerment. A point where countless viewers saw themselves reflected in a Spider-Man who looked like them, sounded like them, lived like them. The multiverse widened not because of cosmic danger, but because a story finally acknowledged the truth that Spider-Man's greatest strength was always his universality. Into the Spider-Verse did not merely succeed, it triumphed. It won awards, yes. It dazzled critics. But more importantly, it changed animation, changed superhero storytelling, and changed what audiences believed these mediums could achieve. It ignited inspiration across cultures and continents. Cosplay exploded. Fan art spread like wildfire. Miles Morales became an icon. But the story did not end there. In 2023, Spider-Man, Across the Spider-Verse expanded the mythos into something even more ambitious. Where the first film was intimate, the second was cosmic. Where the first centered on Miles' transformation, the second examined the cost of that transformation. The multiverse became intricate, complex, full of layers and consequences. The Spider Society emerged. A vast assembly of spider heroes from every universe, united under the enigmatic leadership of Miguel O'Hara, the Spider-Man of 2099. Miguel introduced a concept that shattered the innocence of the Spider-Verse, the idea of canon events. Every Spider-Person, he claimed, must endure certain tragedies: loss of a mentor, the death of a loved one, moments of heartbreak that define their resolve. These events were not accidents. They were the core of the web itself. Tampering with them threatened the stability of the multiverse. But Miles, whose very existence defied canon, refused to accept that his suffering was predetermined. He challenged the notion that tragedy was destiny. He insisted that choice could rewrite fate. And in doing so, he became something new in the multiverse, the Spider-Man who broke the pattern. The watcher watched that defiance with interest. It was rare for any Spider-Person to reject the inevitabilities of their origin. Rare still for them to do it with conviction rather than denial. Miles wasn't rebelling against responsibility. He was demanding that responsibility include compassion for oneself and others. He wasn't challenging the web, he was demanding that it evolve. His stance sparked conflict. Heroes clashed. Universes trembled. But even as chaos unfolded, one truth became clear: the Spider-Verse was no longer a novelty. It was a living narrative ecosystem, where every Spider-Person carried a piece of the whole. Their differences mattered. Their stories mattered. Their voices mattered. By the time the film ended, on a cliffhanger that left the world waiting with bated breath, the multiverse had opened fully. The Spider-Verse was not simply a background concept. It was now the core of what Spider-Man was in modern storytelling, a symbol of inclusivity, possibility, connection, and endless reinvention. In the real world, these films redefined animation and superhero cinema. They elevated Miles Morales to a cultural force, inspired a generation of artists, and set a new gold standard for what visual storytelling could be. Children grew up seeing themselves in Spider-Man in ways that had never been possible before. Adults rediscovered wonder. And the legacy of Spider-Man shifted from the story of one hero to the story of many. The watcher sensed that the web had never been stronger, never more interconnected, never more vibrant. The Spider-Verse was alive, pulsing with infinite tales. And the future, shaped by Miles, Gwen, Miguel, and countless others, held even greater possibilities than the past. Peter Parker had started the myth. Miles Morales and the Spider-Verse were carrying it into eternity. The Spider-Man mythos, at this point in the timeline, has reached a kind of cosmic saturation. No longer a simple story of a boy bitten by a spider, but a vast constellation of identities, destinies, and worlds all orbiting the same central idea. The web is no longer metaphorical. It is a living tapestry, shimmering with infinite variations, each one a reflection of power and responsibility expressed in different voices, different cultures, different hearts. If the earlier decades established the foundations of Spider-Man, the last decade has illuminated what the myth means to the world. Not as a single narrative, but as a collective one. Across universes, Peter Parker still stands as the original thread, the anchor around which all others are woven. His lessons, sacrifices, and triumphs continue to echo through every new interpretation. But Peter no longer carries the mask alone. The Spider-Verse has elevated the truth that always lingered beneath the surface: heroism is not limited to one face, one background, one era. It is universal. Miles Morales emerged as the spark that ignited this realization. He didn't replace Peter, he expanded the definition of what Spider-Man could be. His rise was not a rejection of tradition but an evolution of it. And in Miles' ascent, the world saw something breathtaking: the story had room for everyone. Children saw themselves as Spider-Man without hesitation. Audiences reconnected with the idea that heroism grows from empathy, not perfection. The Spider-Verse films became the artistic manifestation of this truth, blending innovation with emotional authenticity so seamlessly that they felt like the natural evolution of decades of storytelling. The watcher views the web now as something vast and alive, stretching far beyond the boundaries of any one medium. Comics, animation, games, film, each strand reinforces the others, each universe learning from the rest. The myth no longer moves in a single line. It grows outward in all directions, like a spider building a web not for capture, but for connection. And yet, with this expansion comes a new kind of tension, one not born from villains or cosmic threats, but from the weight of possibility. When every version of Spider-Man is canon, when every story matters, when every hero contributes to the greatness of the whole, the question shifts: where does the web go from here? How does a myth continue to grow without losing the human heart at its center? The answer lies in new voices, new interpretations, and new mediums that continue to carry the spirit of Spider-Man into uncharted territory. Because the Spider-Verse is not merely a celebration of diversity, it is a recognition that identity is not static. It evolves. It adapts. It expands. Just as Peter Parker evolved from a lonely teenager to a global icon, the myth adapts to reflect the world around it. And the world is changing faster than ever. Technology is advancing. Animation is breaking every boundary imaginable. Games are becoming cinematic, immersive experiences that rival films in emotional depth. Collective storytelling has entered a new era, one in which audiences don't just watch the hero's journey, but participate in it. Miles Morales stands at the forefront of this new wave. Gwen Stacy follows with her own emotional musical language. Miguel O'Hara commands the future with futuristic grit. Peter B. Parker offers maturity, resilience, and vulnerability for older generations. Insomniac Games' Peter and Miles represent yet another branch, interactive, personal, emotional in ways only video games can deliver. The web is richer than ever. But richness comes with complexity, and complexity with foreshadowing. The multiverse is no longer a distant concept, it is the central stage. And on that stage, new players are stepping forward. New stories are coming. New worlds are weaving themselves into existence. The watcher sees what lies ahead in the distance. A universe where Spider-Man becomes more than a myth. A force of narrative evolution. A reflection of humanity across infinite worlds. And a symbol of possibility that refuses to shrink or stagnate. The Spider-Verse is vast. And it is still only beginning. By 2018, Spider-Man had conquered nearly every medium. Comics had given him decades of evolution. Live-action films had redefined him for global audiences. Animation had reinvented him with radical artistry. And the Spider-Verse had cracked open the multiverse itself, proving once and for all that Spider-Man was not one story, but countless stories woven together in harmony. Yet even with all of this, there remained one frontier where Spider-Man's potential had never been realized to its fullest: video games. For decades, Spider-Man games had existed in fits and starts. Some were beloved cult classics, others ambitious experiments, many forgettable, some infamous for their glitches and chaotic physics. Players wanted to feel like Spider-Man, to swing smoothly through New York, feel the snap of a web line in motion, the rush of wind against their virtual skin, the weight of responsibility embedded in every choice. But technology had never quite reached the fidelity required to truly capture the fantasy. Then Insomniac Games arrived. From their first announcement, there was a tremor in the web, something subtle, but unmistakably promising. This wasn't a hastily licensed adaptation tied to a movie release. It wasn't constrained by a need to mirror any existing continuity. Insomniac was building something new, an entirely original Spider-Man universe, grounded in character, emotion, and craftsmanship. It wasn't aiming to replicate the films or copy the comics. It was something else entirely. An alternate universe that would stand shoulder to shoulder with the greatest Spider-Man stories ever told. The watcher noticed this spark even before the game was released. New universes form all the time, but few arrive with the weight of intention, artistry, and emotional conviction that radiated from Insomniac's creation. When Marvel's Spider-Man launched in 2018, it wasn't just a game, it was an experience that captured the essence of Spider-Man in a way no medium had ever fully achieved. The moment players swung into Manhattan for the first time, weaving between skyscrapers with seamless momentum, it felt as though decades of longing had been answered. Every motion carried the rhythm of Peter Parker's life, fast, fluid, improvisational, but always on the edge of collapse. The city breathed around him, and he breathed along with it. This Peter Parker wasn't a rookie. He wasn't a teenager fumbling through his first mistakes. Insomniac's story began after 8 years of experience, presenting a mature, seasoned Spider-Man who had already weathered countless battles. This choice gave the narrative rich terrain. Peter was competent, witty, and confident in the mask, but his personal life remained tangled with the same familiar struggles: relationships, bill payments, guilt, and the bittersweet ache of lost time. Mary Jane Watson, independent and fearless, wasn't merely a love interest. She was a journalist with her own arc, strength, and agency. Aunt May carried warmth and quiet wisdom, but the years etched into her eyes revealed emotional history that deepened every conversation. Friends, mentors, villains, each character felt alive, complex, textured. The game's writing didn't lean on nostalgia, it built its own identity. And at the center stood Peter, balancing heroism and humanity with a tenderness that made him feel as real as he ever had. The Watcher, observing from his vantage beyond time, admired how perfectly this universe captured the emotional paradox of Spider-Man, powerful yet vulnerable, confident yet fragile, heroic yet deeply human. Then came Otto Octavius. The relationship between Peter and Otto was the heart of the first game, an evolving tragedy that mirrored and reimagined some of the greatest arcs in Spider-Man history. Otto wasn't introduced as a villain but as a mentor, a father figure Peter desperately wanted to believe in. His brilliance was undeniable, his compassion seemingly genuine, his dream noble. But the cracks beneath the surface, financial ruin, frustration, untreated neurological decline, slowly widened until they swallowed him whole. When Otto became Dr. Octopus, Peter wasn't battling a stranger, he was confronting someone he loved. The emotional devastation of their conflict struck with a weight that players carried long after the final blow. And when Otto learned Peter's true identity, the betrayal became personal. It wasn't a twist, it was heartbreak. But it was Aunt May's fate that anchored the game in the emotional canon of Spider-Man. When the Devil's Breath epidemic ravaged the city and Peter was forced to choose between saving thousands or saving the woman who raised him, the decision became a distilled essence of Peter Parker's lifelong burden. Aunt May's death was not sensationalized. It was quiet. Heart-wrenching. Inevitable. Her final moments with Peter felt like a culmination of every lesson he had ever learned, not through a lecture, but through love. Players wept. Critics praised the writing. Fans mourned a fictional death as though it were personal. And the Spider-Man myth grew deeper. But the Insomniac universe did not stop with Peter. In 2020, Marvel's Spider-Man, Miles Morales released, not a DLC, not a side story, but a full narrative centered entirely on Miles as he stepped into his identity. If the first game was about legacy, the second was about inheritance. Miles had the framework of Peter's mentorship, but the game made it clear. He was not a replacement, not a copy, not an understudy. He was his own Spider-Man. His powers were different, bioelectric venom abilities and invisibility, symbolizing the ways he diverged from Peter's path. His world was different, Harlem, community-centered, infused with cultural richness. His challenges were different, identity, trust, belonging, the weight of representing a community that saw itself in him. The Watcher observed the way the web expanded in this universe. Not by splitting Peter's identity, but by enriching it through Miles. Their stories complemented each other, each hero carrying burdens the other could not. By the time Marvel's Spider-Man 2 released in 2023, the Insomniac universe had transformed from an experiment into one of the most emotionally resonant Spider-Man continuities in existence. Peter and Miles stood together as equals, two Spider-Men sharing a city, sharing responsibility, sharing trust in a partnership built on mutual respect. The introduction of the symbiote and Venom added new emotional layers, pushing Peter into darkness while forcing Miles to rise as a stabilizing force. Their arcs intertwined like strands of a growing, living web, strengthening both heroes rather than diminishing either. In the Insomniac universe, the theme became clear: Spider-Man is not defined by a single person but by the relationships that sustain him. The games proved that the myth grows strongest not when one hero stands alone, but when multiple heroes rise together. The Watcher gazed upon this universe with admiration. Insomniac had not simply adapted Spider-Man, they had built a continuity worthy of standing beside the greatest Spider-Man stories of any medium. They honored the legacy, expanded the myth, and gave players a chance to embody the emotional weight of the mask. The web had grown larger once again. The multiverse thrived not merely because of variety, but because of voices, old, new, and emerging, each weaving something essential into the myth. And ahead, the Spider-Verse stood on the threshold of even more change. New films. New crossovers. New interpretations. The web continued to stretch in all directions, alive with possibility. Spider-Man's story had never been more complex, more interconnected, or more universally beloved. And the next era, shaped by games, films, and cross-media storytelling, would continue pulling the strands even tighter, creating a tapestry that no single universe could contain. The story of Spider-Man was not only ongoing. It was accelerating. By the early 2020s, the Spider-Man myth had grown into something impossible to contain within any single medium, continuity, or creative vision. The web had stretched so far, so wide, that its threads wrapped around the entire world, binding together not just fictional universes, but audiences, cultures, generations. The myth no longer belonged to a page, a screen, a console, or even a single identity. It belonged to everyone. The watcher could feel the tension in the cosmic web, a tension not born of danger, but of expansion. A convergence was happening across realities, not by cosmic decree, but through the collective imagination of millions. Spider-Man was evolving into a narrative ecosystem, a multiversal network of stories feeding one another like roots intertwining beneath a forest floor. In one universe, Tom Holland's youthful Peter Parker continued navigating the emotional fallout of No Way Home. He had chosen anonymity, sacrificing relationships and memories to protect the multiverse. He stood alone in a world that no longer recognized him, forging his identity once again in the quiet corners of a city that had forgotten its hero's face. But loneliness did not break him. It reforged him, sharper, quieter, more mature. He became the Spider-Man who must stand without applause, a figure defined not by connections but by conviction. In another universe, Miles Morales soared through the neon glow of Brooklyn, still grappling with the revelations Miguel O'Hara had thrown at him. That his life was an anomaly, that his father's fate was meant to be tragic, that the multiverse demanded sacrifice. But Miles refused the fatalism embedded in canon. His defiance echoed across the Spider-Verse, a resonance that other spider-heroes could feel even if they couldn't explain why. His story no longer followed Peter's blueprint, his story challenged the blueprint itself. Gwen Stacy, in her own world of pastel hues and heart-wrenching music, faced the pain of belonging and isolation in equal measure. Her universe painted her emotions across the architecture, the sky's shifting palette with every tremor of her heart. Gwen had become an icon in her own right, a Spider-Woman whose arc spoke to the complexity of self-discovery, friendship, and the fear of letting others down. She danced between grief and hope with a fluidity that made her one of the most compelling heroes in the multiverse. The Insomniac universe expanded with its own gravity. Its Peter and Miles existed in a world where heroism meant sacrifice not just in battles, but in everyday life, lost relationships, damaged trust, shattered illusions. The symbiote storyline had forced Peter to confront the darkest corners of himself, and Miles had risen to stand beside him not as a sidekick, but as an equal. Their partnership felt like a glimpse of what the future of Spider-Man could be, shared, balanced, strengthened by community rather than solitude. Even beyond these worlds, the Spider-Verse continued to unfurl in unexpected directions. Animated series reinterpreted classic arcs with fresh urgency. Comics explored timelines where Gwen lived, where Peter grew old, where villains reformed, where allies fell, where universes merged and split like cells in constant renewal. New cultural perspectives found their way into Spider-Man stories, stories from different languages, different continents, different lived experiences. The myth grew broader, more inclusive, and more reflective of the world outside the panels. The watcher saw something remarkable happening. The lines between universes, once rigid, were softening. Not literally, not in the sense of characters crossing freely from one continuity to another, but thematically, emotionally, culturally. Stories from one medium echoed into another. Games inspired films. Films inspired comics. Comics inspired animation. Everything fed into everything, a self-sustaining loop of creativity that made the Spider-Verse feel less like separate timelines and more like a single superstructure with infinite rooms. And then something even more extraordinary began to occur. The real world itself became a part of the myth. When audiences cheered for three Spider-Men standing together on a rooftop, they weren't just witnessing a scene. They were participating in a cultural moment where decades of storytelling converged into a single frame. When children wore Miles' suit, they weren't dressing as a replacement Spider-Man, they were expressing a world where identity was expansive, where heroism belonged to all backgrounds and cultures. When players cried over Aunt May in the Insomniac game, they cried not for a fictional character, but for a universal truth, that love and loss shape us as deeply as any power ever could. Spider-Man had become more than a character. He had become a shared emotional language. Peter Parker still represented the heart, the original spark of guilt, love, and resilience that shaped everything that followed. But he was now one of many pillars supporting a myth that had grown taller and wider than its creators could have imagined. Miles Morales embodied the future, a hero who took the lessons of the past and transformed them into a narrative of growth, representation, and limitless potential. Gwen Stacy embodied the complexity of modern identity, fluid, expressive, searching. Miguel O'Hara embodied the weight of structure and expectation. Even the villains reflected deep thematic truths: loneliness, obsession, trauma, ambition, and the longing for connection. As the 2020s progressed, the web began glimmering with even more strands. Studios planned crossovers larger than anything attempted before. Writers envisioned new arcs weaving between mediums. Fan communities became architects of mythmaking, creating art, music, and stories that enriched the universe as much as any official canon. The watcher felt the web vibrating with possibility. Spider-Man was no longer a singular figure swinging between buildings. He was a phenomenon spanning realities. Fictional, digital, cinematic, emotional. A story endlessly retold, not because it needed repetition, but because humanity saw itself in every mask, every fall, every rise. The multiverse was converging in spirit, not in collapse. Spider-Man had become the myth of the modern age. And still, the web kept growing. The next chapter would reveal what happens when the story becomes too big for any one universe to contain, and how the Spider-Verse continues to evolve as the world itself changes. The multiverse stands wide open now, every strand humming with energy, every variation of Spider-Man contributing its own story, its own heartbeat, its own truth. After 6 decades of evolution, reinvention, tragedy, triumph, and transformation, the Spider-Man myth has become one of the most expansive narrative frameworks ever created. And yet, despite its infinite branching timelines and countless alternate identities, something remarkable has remained constant. The heart of Spider-Man has never changed. The watcher feels it in every universe, glowing like a small, steady flame. Whether it burns in Peter Parker, Miles Morales, Gwen Stacy, Penny Parker, Miguel O'Hara, Pavitra Prabhakar, Ben Reilly, or any of the hundreds of spider heroes who have swung through pages and screens, its warmth is unmistakable. The flame is responsibility, shaped by compassion. It is pain, transformed into purpose. It is humility, wrapped in extraordinary power. This flame has carried the myth through eras of radically different tone. It has guided Spider-Man through moments of youthful optimism, brutal tragedy, cosmic upheavals, and multiversal convergence. It has allowed the hero to evolve while remaining recognizable. And across all worlds, across all mediums, across all interpretations, audiences have connected to that flame as if it were part of their own lives. At this stage in the chronicle, the web is so vast that no one perspective can capture it. Spider-Man is no longer just a character. He is an ecosystem of stories, connected, resonant, alive. Each universe reflects a different emotional truth about what it means to be human. The Raimi films show the weight of sacrifice. The web films show the ache of unfinished grief. The MCU shows the struggle of responsibility in a world too big for comfort. The Spider-Verse films show the beauty of individuality within community. The Insomniac games show resilience as something learned over time, not granted by destiny. The comics continue weaving every thread together, one issue at a time. And all of these interpretations, all of these worlds, point back to the same central question that has followed Spider-Man since 1962. What do you do when life asks more of you than you think you can give? Spider-Man answers that question differently in every universe, yet always in a way that feels truthful. Sometimes he leaps without hesitation. Sometimes he hesitates before he leaps. Sometimes he breaks under the pressure. Sometimes he rises stronger. But he always tries. Always cares. Always learns. Always grows. That is the true meaning of the mask, not the powers, not the suit, not the identity, but the choice to keep going. Now, at this juncture in the chronicle, the web stretches into the future with infinite possibilities. The myth has entered an era where universes fold into each other, where new heroes rise beside the old, where audiences participate in shaping the narrative as much as creators. Spider-Man exists in films that redefine animation, games that redefine storytelling, comics that redefine myth, and communities that redefine what it means to belong. And yet, even with such vastness, one truth remains clear: the web holds together because of its center. The flame, the heart, continues to burn. The watcher gazes ahead and sees the next evolution forming in the dim distance. Stories yet untold are waiting to spark. New worlds are preparing to unfold. Conflicts and revelations lie on the horizon. The multiverse will grow louder, more complex, more intertwined. But at the center of it all, one thing endures. Spider-Man remains a story about people, ordinary people, learning to be extraordinary not because fate demands it, but because compassion does. The web expands. The heart stays constant. And the next chapter will explore how this myth continues to redefine itself as new generations pick up the mask, new universes take shape, and the Spider-Verse grows into something even greater than the sum of its strands. The world of Spider-Man had grown so wide by the mid-2020s that it no longer felt contained within any single medium or generation. The web stretched across continents, cultures, and worlds, weaving through comics, games, films, animation, streaming, novels, and the imaginations of fans who recreated the myth in new forms every day. And as the Spider-Verse grew, something else began happening. The future started to blur with the present, and the myth seemed to evolve in real time. The watcher felt this shift like a pulse rippling through the entire multiverse. It wasn't caused by a villain, or a cosmic anomaly, or even a narrative event. It was something more profound, the realization that Spider-Man had become the defining myth of an interconnected age. The story was no longer moving in one direction. It spiraled outward in fractal paths, each one leading to interpretations no single creator could predict. But among this beautiful chaos of voices and visions, certain patterns began to emerge. One of the most striking developments was the growing focus on mentorship and generational inheritance. For decades, Spider-Man had been defined by solitude, the lone hero burdened by responsibility. But now, more and more stories explored the idea of Spider-Man as part of a lineage, a community, a network of individuals learning from one another. Peter Parker was no longer the isolated anchor of the myth. He had become a mentor, a guide, a figure who passed on wisdom forged through pain. Miles Morales was the clearest proof of this shift. His journey had started as a mirror to Peter's, but time had revealed that he wasn't an echo or successor, he was a parallel flame. The torch was not being passed from one Spider-Man to another. The torch had multiplied. Modern stories revealed a world where more than one Spider-Man could exist at once, each fulfilling a unique emotional role. In the Insomniac universe, Peter and Miles stood side by side as partners. In the comics, they crossed paths frequently, forming a bond rooted in mutual respect rather than hierarchy. In animation, Miles became the protagonist of one of the most celebrated films of the decade. And in the hearts of fans, Miles had grown into a symbol of power, belonging, and representation, a beacon for those who had never seen themselves in the mask before. But legacy did not flow in only one direction. Gwen Stacy, once known mainly for tragedy, stepped into the future as her own Spider-Woman in stories that gave her a modern, rhythmic identity. Her world of painted emotions and shifting palettes represented an artistic revolution, one where storytelling and visual language intertwined. Fans embraced her wholeheartedly, not as Peter's lost love, but as a fully realized hero with her own journey to navigate. Her presence added new emotional colors to the Spider-Verse. And beyond these central heroes, new spider identities continued to bloom. Web weavers, Spider-Girls, Silk, Anya Corazon, Japanese Spider-Man, Spider-UK, the futuristic Miguel O'Hara, each new story added another thread to the web. Some universes were bleak, others comedic, others experimental. Together, they formed a sprawling galaxy of narratives, unified by a single heartbeat of responsibility and hope. But as the Spider-Verse grew bigger, something began shifting beneath its surface. A subtle tension between destiny and choice. Canon events had become a defining concept within the multiversal narrative, introduced in Across the Spider-Verse and echoed across various mediums. The idea that Spider-Man's story required tragedy, that certain losses were unavoidable, that pain was woven into the foundation of the myth, cast a long shadow. It raised a question that had simmered for decades but now felt impossible to ignore. Was Spider-Man defined by suffering? Or could he evolve into something grounded in healing, growth, and shared support? This question echoed across universes. Fans debated it. Creators challenged it. The stories themselves began to transform in response. Peter Parker still faced unimaginable hardship, but his narratives increasingly explored recovery rather than endless loss. Miles refused to accept predetermined tragedy. Gwen sought connection to balance her solitude. The heroes of the Spider-Verse were no longer reenacting a cycle of sacrifice, they were breaking it. The Watcher recognized this evolution as one of the greatest turning points in the myth's history. For 6 decades, Spider-Man had been shaped by guilt, guilt over Ben, guilt over Gwen, guilt over failure. Now, new stories were being built on resilience, mentorship, and the idea that community could be as meaningful as responsibility. The Spider-Verse also began intersecting with other major Marvel narratives. The next phase of cinematic storytelling hinted at a future where Peter Parker and Miles Morales might exist within the same continuity. Rumors swirled about new animated series, multiverse-spanning films, and crossovers that would bring together heroes from different eras and mediums. The boundaries between universes softened not to collapse them, but to allow them to breathe together. Even in gaming, the Insomniac universe hinted at a long-term plan, one where Peter aged into a seasoned protector, Miles grew into leadership, and a web of allies and enemies expanded in directions fans could only speculate about. The future of that universe felt vast and unpredictable, full of emotional depth and narrative weight. Comics, always the foundation, continued weaving new realities, some dark, some hopeful, some experimental, all adding to the mythic resonance of Spider-Man. Writers weren't afraid to take risks. Artists weren't afraid to push boundaries. The web only grew richer. Through all of this, one truth became clear: the future of Spider-Man was not linear. It wasn't about succession or replacement. It wasn't about who held the mantle next. It was about multiplicity, about a chorus of voices shaping a myth that could evolve with humanity itself. The Watcher gazed across this living web, sensing what was coming. The next decade of Spider-Man stories would not simply expand the multiverse. They would redefine it. They would make Spider-Man more universal than ever, a myth for every age, every background, every medium. The Spider-Verse had become something infinite. And the story was still only in the middle. The Spider-Verse, by this point in its evolution, no longer felt like a collection of stories scattered across decades. It felt like a living organism, breathing, pulsing, evolving. Its strands were thicker now, more intertwined, more deliberate. The heroes who once swung alone across isolated skylines now moved through a vast cosmic lattice connecting countless worlds. And yet, even as the myth expanded outward into the infinite, something curious began happening: the story started folding back toward its center. The Watcher sensed it long before anyone else did. The multiverse, once a chaotic chorus of independent voices, was gradually harmonizing. Not collapsing, not simplifying, but aligning. There was a subtle shift in the nature of the Spider-Man myth, an awareness forming between worlds, as though each hero could feel faint vibrations through the web when another made a choice that echoed across universes. Peter Parker felt it in brief flashes, moments of déjà vu where he sensed another version of himself standing at the edge of a rooftop, contemplating the same fears he once faced. Miles Morales felt it when his spider sense flickered with unfamiliar rhythms, as though attuned to a frequency beyond his own world. Gwen Stacy felt it in the subtle changes in her universe's colors whenever another universe's emotional gravity tugged against her own. The web was becoming self-aware. As more worlds activated, more spider heroes rose into prominence. Pavitra Prabhakar's Mumbai skyline shimmered with new threads of destiny. Mayday Parker stepped into adolescence with a quiet determination forged from both her parents' strengths. Miguel O'Hara chased anomalies through the collapsing edges of 2099, trying desperately to preserve a structure that no longer obeyed the rules he believed in. New heroes emerged in universes where science, magic, or sheer cosmic chance created spider-inspired protectors who defied every expectation. But beyond the individual stories, a new question lingered in the air. One that the myths themselves seemed to anticipate. What happens when the web becomes too vast for any one hero, or even any one universe, to contain? The world beyond the fiction, the real world, played its own role in this question. Audiences demanded more than repetition. They wanted new voices, new identities, new relationships, new interpretations that reflected an ever-changing society. They wanted Spider-Man stories that confronted modern fears, modern hopes, modern loneliness, and modern connection. And creators answered, weaving new worlds with emotional precision. The MCU hinted at a future where Peter Parker and Miles Morales coexist, not as replacements but as partners. Animation pushed boundaries further, preparing the final chapter of the Spider-Verse trilogy with ambitions that reached beyond universe-hopping spectacle. Games continued exploring themes of legacy and adulthood. Comics experimented with bold styles, merging narrative structures, and cross-universe migration. But the greatest evolution wasn't in content, it was in philosophy. Spider-Man was no longer a character reacting to fate. The myth had grown into a metaphor for choice. For agency. For resilience. Peter Parker, in every universe, was learning to forgive himself. Miles Morales, in every universe, was learning to define himself. Gwen Stacy, in every universe, was learning to belong on her own terms. The Spider-Verse as a whole was learning that heroism need not be born from tragedy, it could be born from compassion, community, and self-discovery. The Watcher saw countless futures unfolding simultaneously. In one, Peter mentored a new generation of heroes while stepping into a quieter life of research and teaching. In another, Miles led the charge to protect the multiverse from threats that defied physics, morality, and time. In yet another, Gwen became a multiversal ambassador, using her unique emotional resonance to navigate worlds where logic and art intertwined. These futures did not conflict. They coexisted, parallel possibilities sustained by the same heartbeat of the web. And yet, even with the endless expansion, the myth showed signs of coalescing again. The future wasn't just branching outward. It was curving toward a moment when the multiverse might converge not through crisis, but through unity. There were hints everywhere. The spider sense, once a personal alert, had begun resonating across worlds in broader patterns. Some heroes reported dreaming of other universes. Others experienced unexplained flashes of memory that weren't their own. And occasionally, when two spider people fought side by side, their movements began to mirror each other with eerie synchronicity, as though guided by an unseen rhythm. The web was preparing for something. Not destruction. Not collapse. Not the end of universes. But evolution. Every era had brought Spider-Man to a point of transformation. 1962 gave him life, the 1970s gave him tragedy, the 1980s deepened his complexity, the 1990s fractured his identity, the 2000s reinvented him, the 2010s multiplied him, and the 2020s wove him into something greater than any single origin. Now the myth stood at the edge of its next metamorphosis. The Watcher did not know exactly what form this future would take, only that it would emerge from the choices of countless spider heroes across countless worlds. A convergence built not on destruction, but on connection. A new chapter where the mask might mean something different than ever before. Perhaps Spider-Man would become an interdimensional guardian. Perhaps the Spider-Verse would coalesce into a shared society. Perhaps new mediums would blur fiction and reality further. Or perhaps the next great story would come from a Spider-Man not yet born, in a universe that had yet to spin its first thread. What the Watcher knew for certain was this. The Spider-Man myth would not shrink. It would not fade. It would not be replaced. It would evolve. And in that evolution lay the infinite potential of the web. A future woven from every voice that ever wore the mask. And every voice yet to come. The Spider-Verse had entered an era of expansion so rapid and so intricate that even the Watcher found himself compelled to observe with heightened attention. For all its decades of evolution, for all its branching timelines and reshaped destinies, the Spider-Verse now stood at a crossroads, a moment suspended between what it had been and what it was becoming. It was a rare state for any myth to reach, the point where past, present, and future seemed to revolve around each other in a single, trembling moment. Across countless worlds, spider heroes felt it too, even if they couldn't name it. A strange sense of anticipation hovered like static in the air, as though every thread of the web was waiting for something to happen. It wasn't dread, not exactly. It was more like the stillness before a new dawn. Peter Parker in the main universe could feel it most strongly during quiet nights. When he perched on rooftops, listening to the hum of New York's traffic and his own thoughts, he sensed the echo of something larger than his own struggles. He felt as though someone, or something, had been watching the multiverse with fascination, waiting for the next shift to reveal itself. That sense, blended with his own desire to give back more than he had taken, led Peter into a new phase of maturity. He became less reactive, more reflective, older not just in age, but in wisdom. The youthful uncertainty had faded, replaced by a quiet acceptance of who he was and who he had become. Miles Morales, meanwhile, stood at the beginning of his greatest test. His world was no longer a place where he simply followed in Peter's footsteps. It was a place defined by his choices. Choices that confronted the outdated logic of canon events, choices that challenged centuries of Spider-Man stories built on tragedy. Every time he swung through Brooklyn, he felt the weight of expectation pressing down on him, not from his world, but from every world that now knew his story. He knew he was no anomaly. He was a necessary evolution. But even knowing that did not make the path ahead easier. In Gwen Stacy's universe, the colors of her world shifted more often now, reflecting an emotional turbulence she had grown used to navigating. Her bandmates noticed her drifting, disappearing at odd hours, returning with wrists bruised from web-slinging. They didn't understand the burdens she carried. Her world did not always understand her. Yet Gwen had never been more certain of her place in the Spider-Verse. She had carved out an identity that was wholly her own, no longer defined by tragedy or romance, but by autonomy, artistic expression, and a desire to protect the people she loved. Even when she felt alone, she moved through her world with the conviction of someone who had finally learned to trust her own voice. But the crossroads was not merely emotional, it was structural. The fabric of the Spider-Verse was reorganizing itself. In some universes, new spider heroes emerged with powers rooted not in science, but in magic or cosmic energy. In others, Spider-Man became a symbol for political resistance or cultural change. Some worlds embraced their spider hero as a mythic guardian, others as a flawed figure struggling to find balance. And in the darkest corners of the multiverse, broken versions of the mask reminded everyone that Spider-Man could be corrupted. Sometimes by grief, sometimes by anger, and sometimes by the unbearable pressure of responsibility. Miguel O'Hara, determined to control the chaos, continued operating from 2099 with the single-mindedness of someone who believed the multiverse could unravel if even one thread was pulled too hard. But the more he tried to create order, the more he realized the web was not a machine that could be stabilized by rules. It was a living thing. A network of choices, emotions, fates, and stories that could not be contained, only guided. The Watcher saw Miguel struggle as one faced by many Spider-Men over the decades, the desire to protect the world by controlling the world. But the Spider-Verse was teaching him, and everyone, a lesson even deeper than responsibility. It was teaching them adaptation, flexibility, the willingness to accept that the future was not a straight line but a spiral of infinite possibilities. Meanwhile, the real world played its own part in shaping the Crossroads. Films broke language barriers and introduced millions to Miles, Gwen, Peter B. Parker, Miguel, Pavich, Hobie, and countless others. Games delivered emotional arcs that left players shaken. Comics experimented with daring visual styles and new narrative structures. The very act of storytelling had become multiversal, creators across mediums unintentionally echoing each other, reacting to each other, amplifying each other. It was no longer clear where one continuity ended and another began. The myth flowed freely between them, refracted in countless forms yet unified in essence. The convergence wasn't literal, Spider-Men from different worlds weren't merging into one timeline, but thematic. Emotional. Symbolic. This was the Crossroads. A moment where the myth realized it could no longer grow only outward, it had to grow inward. Deepening its meaning. Strengthening its core. And the core was simple. The mask does not shape the hero shapes the mask. Each universe had taught its lesson. Peter's perseverance. Miles' defiance of destiny. Gwen's emotional truth. Miguel's understanding of order. Hobie's anarchic joy. Pavich's optimism. The legacy of Spider-Man had become a mosaic, not a mirror. The Watcher, seeing all of this, knew that the next leap would not be defined by the creation of new universes or new heroes, but by the integration of everything learned so far. The multiverse was preparing not for collapse or crisis, but for evolution, the kind of evolution where every spider hero would step into a future shaped by choice rather than canon. The Crossroads would not last forever. The next step, the next era, would arrive soon. It would be shaped by unity, not solitude. By growth, not guilt. By connection, not destiny. The web was tightening. The future was forming. And every spider-person across every universe could feel it. That strange, electric sensation that precedes transformation. What came next would change the Spider-Verse forever. The Spider-Verse had reached a point of complexity so vast that even the Watcher, with his boundless perception and omniversal vision, found himself marveling at how far the web had stretched. Worlds once disconnected now vibrated in harmony. Heroes once isolated now felt the presence of countless others who shared their burdens. The mask, once a lonely symbol worn by a single young man from Queens, had become a banner flying across infinite realities. But as the web grew wider, its strands didn't drift apart, they pulled closer. Something ancient and subtle was happening, like a loom tightening its weave. The multiverse was not collapsing, nor was it merging. It was synchronizing. And in that synchronizing, a deeper truth was beginning to reveal itself. The Watcher noticed it in the smallest details. When Peter Parker leapt between rooftops, he felt not just the familiar snap of his webs but a faint echo, as though another spider-person in another universe had leapt at the exact same moment. When Miles Morales steadied his breathing before facing an impossible decision, he felt a strange strength enter his chest, not his own, but borrowed from someone else who understood the weight he carried. When Gwen Stacy played her drums, she sometimes heard rhythmic patterns she had never written, as if her beat aligned with music from worlds where she had never been born. These sensations were not hallucinations, not glitches, not anomalies. They were the first signs of something new emerging from the multiverse, an emotional resonance that connected every spider hero not by fate, not by canon, but by empathy. For decades, Spider-Man had been defined by tragedy. The loss of Uncle Ben, the fall of Gwen Stacy, the death of loved ones, the crushing burden of responsibility. But now, in the modern era, the myth was refusing to be shaped solely by pain. New stories were challenging old rules. New heroes were dismantling outdated assumptions. Miles Morales, in particular, had become a living rejection of inevitability. He refused to believe that suffering was the price of heroism. His defiance pulsed through the multiverse like a heartbeat, awakening something dormant in the web itself. This shift didn't erase tragedy, it contextualized it. Pain was no longer the foundation of every Spider-Man story. It became one of many forces shaping the hero, balanced by love, friendship, community, and joy. The myth was maturing, growing, healing. In every universe, subtle changes reflected this evolution. Peter Parker, older and wiser now, found himself mentoring more younger heroes than ever before. He no longer feared being replaced, he understood that legacy was a shared responsibility. Miles Morales grew more confident in forging his own path, shaping the future not by rejecting Peter's lessons but by expanding them. Gwen learned that she didn't have to carry her emotions alone, her story gained warmth, connection, and a sense of belonging she once thought impossible. Even Miguel O'Hara, rigid and guarded, began to see cracks in his worldview. He found himself questioning the harsh doctrines he once enforced, realizing that destiny was not as fixed as he believed. Every Spider-Person, in their own universe, discovered that they were no longer alone in their struggle. They had become part of something larger, not a team, not an army, but a living myth that had begun to unify its own internal contradictions. The Watcher perceived this as more than narrative growth. He saw it as evolution in real time. Stories were communicating across mediums. Audiences were influencing creators. Creators were influencing fans. The boundaries between universes were metaphorically dissolving. The Spider-Verse was becoming a single, interconnected emotional experience shared by millions. And within that convergence, a new kind of power emerged. Not a superpower. Not something that could be measured by speed or strength, but a spiritual force woven into the fabric of the multiverse, the power of connection. Spider-Man, in every form, had always been about connection. His relationships defined him. His vulnerability endeared him. His compassion guided him. Now, that compassion was becoming the guiding principle of the entire Spider-Verse. The heroes didn't know it yet, but the web was preparing for a transformation that would reshape its future. This new era would not be defined by the emergence of a single Spider-Man or the fall of another. It would not be defined by battles, losses, or catastrophes. It would be defined by unity, by the collective realization that the mask was not a burden but a bond. The real world mirrored this sentiment. Fans no longer debated which Spider-Man was the truest. Instead, they celebrated each version as a valid reflection of a universal idea, that heroism can belong to anyone. The myth had reached a point where diversity wasn't a novelty, it was the expectation. New spider heroes rose with unique voices, identities, and emotional journeys. The Spider-Verse became fertile ground for creativity, experimentation, and representation. The Watcher saw that this unity was not the end of the myth. It was the beginning of its next phase. The web grew stronger when its strands worked together, not when they stood apart. The future of Spider-Man would not be determined by one timeline, one hero, or one medium. It would be determined by the collective vision of countless worlds. The crossroads had passed. The unification had begun. And soon, very soon, the Spider-Verse would take its next leap. One that would redefine what a multiversal myth could become. The Spider-Verse had grown into a phenomenon so vast and alive that even the oldest cosmic forces struggled to comprehend its shape. Worlds spun like beads threaded on an infinite strand, each illuminated by the familiar silhouette of a hero swinging between rooftops, leaping into danger, and choosing compassion over fear. And yet, something deeper was happening now, something subtle, immense, and inevitable. The Watcher could sense it before the spider heroes themselves did. The web was tightening. It wasn't tightening in fear, or constriction, or collapse. Rather, it was gathering its threads, weaving them closer in preparation for a moment of transformation that had been forming for decades without anyone noticing. Across the multiverse, the signs were everywhere. In one universe, Peter Parker woke from a dream with tears on his cheeks and a soft, inexplicable warmth in his chest, as though someone else had cried the same tears in another world, and somehow he felt them. The sensation lingered long after he opened his eyes. It wasn't grief. It was connection. Miles Morales, far from Peter's world, paused mid-swing as his spider sense flashed, not in warning, but in recognition. The sensation wasn't tied to danger. It came with a subtle pull, like gravity tilting ever so slightly, urging him towards something he could not yet see. He steadied himself on a Brooklyn rooftop, trying to catch his breath, feeling as though the universe itself was calling to him. Gwen Stacy felt it in her fingertips when she drummed late at night. The notes she played twisted into unfamiliar melodies, set to rhythms that didn't belong to her world. Yet they felt right, like echoes from distant universes syncing with her emotions. Her world's colors shifted when she hit certain chords, the hues rippling in soft waves as though responding to harmonies traveling across dimensions. Even Miguel O'Hara sensed the shift. The man who lived by prevention, structure, and stability noticed data anomalies in the Spider Society's systems. Patterns that suggested a unifying influence spreading across the multiverse, threading through timelines beyond his control. He tried to isolate it, contain it, define it. But the more he analyzed, the clearer it became, this wasn't a threat. It was evolution. The web had always been alive, always shifting, always responding to the emotional truths of the spider heroes within it. But now it was awakening to something more. A collective consciousness forged not by fate, but by shared experience. For generations, the Spider-Man myth had been held together by a single idea, the belief that heroism required sacrifice. That pain was the price of responsibility. That tragedy shaped strength. But the new era of spider heroes was challenging those assumptions, pushing back against the idea that suffering defined them. Miles Morales refused to accept inevitable tragedy. Gwen Stacy refused to be shaped by loss. Peter Parker refused to let guilt be the guiding force of his future. Their resistance created ripples, small at first, then massive, rewriting the emotional DNA of the Spider-Verse. The Watcher could see those ripples converging. The web was responding to its heroes' growth. For the first time in its history, it wasn't forcing their evolution, they were shaping its. This was something new. Something unprecedented. Something the multiverse had never seen. The rise of a unified Spider-Verse not through crisis, not through war, but through shared spirit. Yet change, even positive change, brings uncertainty. In countless worlds, spider heroes began experiencing visions. Not nightmares, not prophecies, but flickers of alternate lives. Moments where they saw themselves through the eyes of another universe's Spider-Man, memories not their own. Laughter not their own. Heartbreak not their own. Pavitra Prabhakar felt sudden flashes of neon skylines that weren't Mumbai. Hobie Brown glimpsed versions of himself rendered in ink, paint, and glitch. Penny Parker dreamed of Spider-Mech she hadn't yet built. Peter B. Parker felt a strange longing, not for a moment he'd lived, but for one an alternate version of himself experienced, watching a young Miles take his first leap of faith. These visions weren't warnings or errors. They were connections, threads tightening. The multiverse was preparing for something monumental, and the spider heroes could feel it in every instinct. They gathered without knowing why, drawn toward crossroads between worlds. Some met in liminal spaces, half-formed intersections between universes where time felt blurry and the sky shifted between colors. Others saw portals flicker before them, shimmering with the familiar hum of interdimensional energy, but charged with a new warmth. And some simply felt the pull in their hearts, a gravity that no villain could manipulate and no device could detect. For the first time, the web was summoning them not to defend it, but to witness something. Peter Parker arrived at the Crossroads first, stepping into a realm of swirling light and silver threads stretching endlessly in every direction. He had been here before, during the Inheritors, during the early days of the Spider-Verse, but it had never felt like this. The air was calm, not charged. The threads glowed softly, not in distress but in anticipation. Miles appeared next, dropping through a ripple in the fabric of space, landing with a graceful thud beside Peter. He looked around, eyes wide, sensing the energy vibrating through the realm. "Feels different," Miles whispered. Peter nodded. "Yeah. Like the web's breathing." More heroes arrived by the second. Gwen, Havok, Noir, Penny, Mayday, Silk, Ben Reilly, Hobie, Spider-Ham, Jess Drew, and countless others, each stepping forward with an unspoken understanding that something larger than any individual hero was unfolding. Even Miguel O'Hara emerged, though he stood apart at first, arms crossed, observing everything with a wary eye. But even he couldn't deny the resonance humming through his claws, through his suit, through his instincts. The web was singing. All of them could feel it. The Watcher observed from beyond, marveling at how far the myth had come. For decades, the Spider-Verse had been defined by crisis, universes falling, heroes dying, threats consuming reality. But now the web had unified these heroes not to face destruction, but to transform. This was not the gathering before a storm. This was the gathering before a revelation. A moment suspended between eras. A moment that would reshape everything that came after. Yet the revelation itself had not yet arrived. The web was still gathering its threads, pulling every hero closer, preparing them for the truth they had spent a lifetime, across countless lives, waiting to understand. Something was approaching. Something ancient. Something inevitable. Something beautiful. And when it arrived, the Spider-Verse would never be the same. The realm at the center of the Spider-Verse pulsed with a quiet radiance, its strands glowing like arteries carrying the lifeblood of infinite worlds. Every thread hummed with familiar rhythm, the heartbeat of responsibility, the pulse of compassion, the vibration of countless leaps taken across rooftops in 1,000 different universes. And now, for the first time, all those threads converged in a single, shimmering locus. The spider-heroes stood together, suspended between worlds, their silhouettes outlined in soft golden light. They had gathered for battles before, assembled to face inheritors and anomalies, cosmic threats and collapsing timelines. But this moment did not carry the tension of impending war. There was no panic, no alarms, no desperation in their eyes. Instead, there was wonder, a recognition that something extraordinary was happening just beyond their understanding. Peter Parker felt it most strongly. His spider sense, usually a warning bell, had become a compass pointing inward, toward the center of the web itself. It pulsed not with danger but with anticipation. He glanced at Miles Morales, who stood beside him with his mask pulled back, eyes wide and steady. "You feel that too?" Peter asked. Miles nodded slowly. "Yeah. It's like, the whole multiverse is taking one big breath." Gwen Stacy stepped closer, drawn by the same gravity. Her world's colors always reflected her emotions, but here they dimmed into soft pastel blues and purples that shimmered along the edges of her figure. "This place has never felt like this before," she whispered. "It feels alive." The Watcher observed from afar, his presence a silent witness to history. He understood what the heroes did not, that the Spider-Verse had reached a level of interconnected consciousness no cosmic map could define. The stories, identities, and emotional truths of every spider hero had woven themselves into a single tapestry, not homogenized, but harmonized. The strands began to tighten further, drawing the heroes closer to the nexus point where all realities touched. A soft vibration passed th. Rough the air, a gentle resonance, like tuning forks aligning. Threads of light extended from the web and wrapped loosely around the heroes' chests, not binding them, but connecting them. Miguel O'Hara stiffened as the light brushed against him. For so long he had tried to control the web through logic, structure, and rigid canon. Now the web reached out to him directly, bypassing his systems entirely. He felt a warmth in his ribcage, unfamiliar, unwelcome, undeniable. "This isn't right," Miguel muttered, though his voice lacked its usual hardness. "The web doesn't act like this. It doesn't reach out." Hobie Brown laughed, standing with casual ease on a strand of silk that shouldn't have been able to hold him. "Maybe it never reached out to you, big man. Doesn't mean it can't." Pavitra Prabhakar raised his hands toward the glowing air, eyes filled with curiosity. "Everything feels connected. Like the emotions of every spider person are blending together. This is beautiful." The web brightened at his words, as if responding to praise. Then, with a gentle shifting motion, like a great being stirring in its sleep, the nexus opened. It didn't open like a portal or a crack. It expanded like an aperture of light, layers of shimmering threads unfolding in spirals, revealing a core the heroes had never seen before. It was not a place, not a machine, not a deity. It was a consciousness made of silk and memory. The sentient heart of the Spider-Verse. And it was awakening. The Watcher felt the shift ripple through the multiverse. Reality itself seemed to exhale, releasing tension built over decades of stories filled with pain, sacrifice, and struggle. The heart of the web glowed with a soft gold, not the harsh brilliance of cosmic power, but the warm luminescence of emotional truth. Peter stepped forward instinctively. His life had been shaped by the web more than anyone's. Every loss, every triumph, every choice echoing across universes. He did not speak, but he didn't need to. The web responded to his presence, threads aligning like respectful bowing. Miles stepped forward too, his hand brushing Peter's arm. The web responded to him with equal intensity, its glow brightening around him, resonating with his defiant spirit, the spirit that had challenged destiny itself. Gwen joined them, her presence adding a soft melodic vibration to the energy. And soon others followed, until the entire assembly stood in a wide arc facing the awakening core. The heart of the Spider-Verse pulsed once. A sound followed, not a voice, not words, but an emotional frequency that all of them felt simultaneously. It wasn't heard through ears, but through memory, instinct, and shared experience. It carried the weight of every Spider-Man story ever told, the grief, the joy, the fear, the resilience. The heroes gasped. Miles staggered back slightly. "What was that?" he whispered. Peter swallowed. "I think it spoke." But the web did not speak through language. It communicated through understanding. Each hero suddenly saw glimpses of each other's lives, flashes of rooftop chases, tearful confessions, first leaps of faith, heartbreaks, and triumphs. Not in overwhelming detail, but in emotional beats. The web was showing them their shared identity. Their unity. Their purpose. They were not alone. They had never been alone. Every Spider-Person across the multiverse was connected by something deeper than canon or destiny. Compassion. Responsibility. Choice. This was the revelation the web had been preparing them for, its awakening into a unified emotional organism. For decades, Spider-Man had been portrayed as a solitary hero carrying a burden too heavy for any one person. Now the myth was transforming into something else entirely. A collective heroism. A shared destiny shaped not by pain, but by connection. The threads tightened once more, gently drawing the assembly closer. Miguel dropped to one knee, overwhelmed by the truth he had spent years resisting. Gwen wiped her eyes as the emotional resonance swelled in her chest. Miles placed a hand over his heart, feeling the warmth spread through him like an empowering surge. And Peter, the original thread, the first heartbeat, felt tears slip down his face. The Watcher, in quiet awe, understood the significance. The Spider-Verse was evolving into a new form. Not collapsing. Not diverging. But harmonizing. The web pulsed a second time, stronger now, radiant, alive. Something magnificent was about to emerge from its awakening. Something transformative. Something ancient yet new. Something only a unified Spider-Verse could give birth to. And when it did, nothing, not a single universe, not a single hero, would ever be the same. For a long moment, the assembled spider-heroes simply stood in silence, suspended between infinite worlds as the heart of the Spider-Verse glowed before them. The light wasn't blinding, it was warm, soft, almost gentle. It radiated like the memory of a long-lost home, familiar in a way none of them could articulate, yet unmistakably new. The web pulsed with steady rhythm, not rushed, not frantic, but deliberate, as if allowing them time to comprehend what was happening. The Watcher observed the awakening with a solemn stillness. He had seen universes born, timelines fracture, cosmic entities rise and fall like tides. But this was different. This was not destruction or creation, it was realization. It was the moment a myth became aware of itself. Peter Parker took a tentative step forward, drawn by instinct. His life had been intertwined with the web longer than most, his story woven into its earliest threads. But he no longer felt the familiar weight of guilt tugging at him. Instead, he felt clarity. A sense of being seen, not as a symbol, not as a martyr, but as a person. Miles Morales stood beside him, shoulders squared, eyes bright with a mixture of awe and determination. The pulse of the web resonated inside him with unique intensity, as though responding to the spirit that had defied canon and reshaped expectations. Miles wasn't replacing anyone. He wasn't deviating. He was contributing, adding threads that strengthened the whole. Around them, the other spider-heroes felt similar shifts. Gwen Stacy's world-muted blues deepened into richer hues as the emotional resonance coursed through her. Pavitra pressed a hand to his chest, breath-catching as he felt an inexplicable connection to futures he hadn't yet lived. Noir's stoic expression cracked, just slightly, as a warmth he didn't recognize brushed against his usually hardened aura. Even Spider-Ham, normally a whirlwind of humor, grew still, eyes widening as if he finally sensed the seriousness beneath the absurdity. The web pulsed again. And this time, it spoke. Not in words, but in emotion, a vast tapestry of shared memory that swept over them all at once. Each hero saw flashes, Uncle Ben's final moment, Gwen Stacy's fall, the leap of faith that defined Miles, the crushing loneliness of Peter B. Parker in his darkest days, the anger that consumed Miguel O'Hara when his family was lost, the triumph of Pavitra saving Mumbattan, the joy of Mayday Parker's first steps. These memories did not overwhelm, they flowed like a river, each drop carrying meaning, each current guiding understanding. The web was showing them what they had always been, reflections of one another, mirrors shaped by different worlds but forged from the same emotional truth. Responsibility. Choice. Hope. Peter gasped softly. It's letting us see each other. Miles nodded, swallowing hard. Not the battles. The reasons. Gwen wiped her eyes. It sees us. All of us. The heart of the web pulsed brighter. The Watcher could feel the shift deepening, expanding outward across the entire Spider-Verse. Every spider-person not physically present, heroes in digital worlds, animated frames, comic pages, forgotten universes, felt the resonance. It passed through them like sunlight breaking through fog, awakening their instincts, sharpening their senses, reminding them that they were part of something immense and unified. Miguel O'Hara, who had resisted emotional vulnerability more fiercely than any of them, felt his knees wobble. He reached out to steady himself on a strand of silk, though he had never needed physical support before. "It's rewriting itself," he whispered, voice trembling in a way he couldn't hide. "The web. It's evolving." But the heart of the web was not rewriting the multiverse. It was revealing something that had been true all along and only now had space to bloom. The multiversal connections that Spider-Man's stories had hinted at for years, symbolism shared across mediums, emotional echoes between versions, inspirations passed between creators and fans, were not accidents. They were the web learning, growing, awakening. The threads around the heroes brightened further, illuminating the nexus with golden fire. The light climbed up their suits, outlining them in soft halos, not as chosen champions, but as equal conduits. Every Spider-Person was a thread, and together they formed the pattern. Peter looked around the gathering and felt a deep, indescribable peace. "We're not alone anymore," he murmured. "We never were." Miles inhaled shakily. "So what now? What's it trying to show us?" The heart of the web pulsed a third time, the strongest yet. Their surroundings shifted. The nexus stretched outward, unfolding into vast cosmic vistas made of silk and starlight. Worlds spun in synchronized patterns. Timelines hovered like floating scrolls. The Spider-Verse revealed its architecture, fractal and infinite, yet elegantly structured around one central truth. The web did not exist despite its many heroes. It existed because of them. Because of their compassion. Their resilience. Their refusal to give in to despair. The web strengthened every time a Spider-Person chose empathy over anger, aid over apathy, responsibility over fear. Their stories weren't shaped by tragedy, their stories shaped the web. Their heroism sustained the multiverse itself. And now, the web offered something in return. A final revelation passed through the heroes, a surge of unity so profound that even the Watcher felt its echo. The next phase of the Spider-Verse would not be built on crisis. It would not be built on sacrifice. It would not be built on predetermined canon. It would be built on harmony. Every Spider-Person felt this truth resonate through them. They were no longer individual protectors fighting in isolation. They were guardians of a shared, living myth. The web was awakening fully. And its awakening was the beginning of a new era. An era where the Spider-Verse did not simply expand outward, but strengthened inward, becoming something more unified, more conscious, more powerful than ever before. The heroes stood in stunned silence as the vision faded, the heart of the web settling into a gentle, rhythmic glow. They knew what they had witnessed. They knew what it meant. Everything was about to change. Everything. The Spider-Verse had awoken. And soon, every universe would feel its voice. When the heart of the web dimmed back into its steady glow, the spider-heroes remained suspended in a silence so profound it felt like part of the cosmic fabric itself. The revelation had settled over them like a warm snowfall, soft, radiant, impossible to ignore. They were still themselves, still individuals forged by their own worlds and struggles, but something fundamental had shifted. A thread had tightened between them, not physical, but emotional, spiritual, resonant. The Watcher observed them carefully. He had seen multiversal awakenings before, cosmic beings discovering their power, realities merging, timelines collapsing. But this was different. It was quieter, more intimate. It wasn't the roar of universes exploding or the thunder of cosmic intervention. It was the first breath of a new era. But with any awakening comes the first tremor. It began softly, in a universe none of them recognized, a quiet world tucked far out on the edge of possibility. A world with no Spider-Man. No Spider-Woman. No Spider-Totem. It was a world that had always been silent on the web, a blank space between universes. Until now. The tremor rippled outward like a pulse of warmth spreading through water. The Nexus realm flickered. Miles felt it first, a tug at the edge of his consciousness, as though a new heartbeat had joined the chorus. Gwen sensed it next, her world's inner colors subtly shifting around her silhouette. Peter felt it too, an instinctive tightening in his chest that didn't signal danger but unmistakably signaled change. Even Miguel, stoic and analytical, froze, because this tremor didn't match anything in his data, his algorithms, or his models. It wasn't an anomaly. It wasn't a threat. It was a beginning. The web pulsed once, acknowledging the disturbance with a soft ripple of light. What was that? Havage murmured. Miles closed his eyes, trying to focus on the sensation. Like a new thread. One we've never felt before. Gwen nodded slowly, fingers pressing lightly to her temple. Yeah. But not like someone falling. More like someone waking up. Hobie chuckled under his breath. World got itself a spider, didn't it? But it wasn't that simple. The web would not awaken a new spider hero casually. The process was rare, unpredictable, often rooted in the deepest emotional needs of a universe. Yet the tremor continued, echoing through the nexus with growing intensity, not threatening, not violent, but insistent. The Watcher sensed it too. And for the first time in ages, he did not fully understand the origin. Something's changing, Peter whispered. It already changed, Miles corrected. This is what comes after. The web brightened slightly, reacting to their words. The threads overhead shimmered with faint points of light. Each a representation of a spider person watching from their own reality. The awakening had reached them too. And now, they all felt the tremor. Across worlds, spider heroes paused mid-battle, on rooftops, in classrooms, in labs, in homes. Their spider sense prickled with the same strange warmth. They didn't know what it meant, but they recognized the feeling. A new voice had joined the web. But whose? Peter stepped forward, gazing into the heart of the web. Is it calling to us? Or calling someone else? The web's glow shifted, not answering, but prompting. A soft rhythm pulsed through the nexus, guiding the heroes toward the trembling thread. Miles felt the pull and instinctively followed, stepping onto a filament of silk that extended into the shimmering light. Gwen followed. Peter followed. The others trailed behind. Miguel hesitated, staring at the thread as though unsure whether to trust the path. But he followed too. Drawn not by duty this time, but by curiosity. The thread expanded into a tunnel of swirling luminescence, a path between realities. It wasn't like the portals they had used before. It was organic, dreamlike, pulsing with newborn energy. The group stepped through one by one, swallowed by the glowing passageway. The Watcher followed silently, unseen, as he always was, though even he felt a sense of anticipation. At the end of the tunnel lay a universe unlike any they had known. It was quiet. Gentle. Balanced. A world untouched by superhumans, villains, cosmic threats, or guardians. It was the kind of world where Spider-Man had never been needed, until now. The heroes emerged into a dusky cityscape, familiar in shape but oddly muted. No masked figures swung across its skyline. No newspaper clippings announced vigilantes. No graffiti celebrated heroes. It was an untouched canvas. Peter looked around cautiously. There's no Spider-Man here. Miles shook his head. Not yet. The tremor pulsed again, guiding them down the street. They followed until the thread led them to a quiet apartment window, glowing faintly from within. A faint voice could be heard inside, gentle, uncertain. A child's voice. Miles' breath caught. No way. Through the glass, they saw a young boy, no older than 10, lying awake in bed, staring at his hands. In his palm was a faint glow, a spark of golden light identical to the heart of the web. His eyes were wide, frightened, overwhelmed. He didn't know what was happening to him. But the web did. Peter stepped back, stunned. The web didn't just awaken. Gwen swallowed hard. It chose someone. The child sat up, clutching his glowing hand close to his chest, as though trying to protect it from the world, or protect the world from it. The tremor that the Spider-Verse felt was not a threat. It was not a warning. It was a birth cry. The first spider of a brand new universe. Miles whispered the truth first. The one all of them felt in their bones. A new Spider-Man is being born. And the web had brought them here to witness it. The child's hand glowed softly in the darkened room, the faint golden light reflecting across his wide, frightened eyes. He wasn't screaming, or running, or calling for help. He simply stared at his palm as though it were a secret the universe had whispered into his skin. A secret he was too young to understand. Beyond the window, hidden in the shadows of the quiet street, the spider heroes watched him with a reverence none of them expected. They had fought cosmic threats, watched universes rise and fall, crossed dimensions, faced destiny head-on, yet what they saw now left them breathless. This was the beginning of a story they all knew intimately. A spark. A moment. A first tremor of destiny. Peter Parker's heart tightened. He had seen this moment in his own life, not as a glowing hand, but as a strange itch, a sudden sensitivity, a rush of power and confusion that changed his life forever. But this child wasn't older, wasn't a teenager accustomed to navigating fear or responsibility. He was young, painfully young, and the sight made Peter's chest ache. "He can't be more than 10, Peter whispered, his voice heavy with memory. Miles Morales stood at Peter's side, gaze steady. The web doesn't usually choose kids this young. Not on purpose. Maybe it didn't choose him, Gwen mused. Her tone was thoughtful, not accusatory. Maybe he resonated with it. The idea hung in the air like a fragile thread. Miguel stepped forward, arms crossed, brow furrowed. The usual severity in his expression was softened by uncertainty. "This is outside the normal structure," he muttered. "The web's awakening could be changing the criteria. Or creating new ones. Does everything gotta be criteria and structure with you?" Hobie's voice cut in with his usual loose, disdainful rhythm. "Maybe the kid's just meant to be Spider-Man." Miguel glared. Hobie smirked. The tension dissolved when a soft vibration rolled through the room, the child's hand pulsing again with faint gold. The web was speaking. Not loudly. Not urgently. Just calling attention. Peter exhaled shakily. "We can't interfere." Miles turned sharply. "We're here because the web brought us, Pete." "I know," Peter said, "but that doesn't mean we get to decide his fate." Gwen nodded in agreement. "We're witnesses. Maybe guides. But we don't get to shape the moment for him." A soft cry came from the window. The child winced as a spark flickered up his arm, not painful, but startling. He scrambled backward on his bed, clutching his hand against his chest. The glow intensified, swirling into a faint pattern that resembled webbing. Miles took a step toward the window without thinking. "He's scared." "Of course he's scared," Miguel replied quietly. "We all were." The memory washed over them, the confusion, the first dizzying rush of power, the fear of becoming something they couldn't understand yet. And here, in this new universe, a child faced it alone. The web pulsed again, brighter this time. Gwen felt it first, a tug not toward the boy, but toward each other. "It's pulling us together," she murmured. "Like it wants us unified." Miles closed his eyes. "It wants us to choose, not for him. For ourselves." Peter looked from face to face, reading the mix of emotions reflected in the others, fear, awe, compassion, hesitation. "We need to figure out why we're here." "The web brought us," Miles said softly, "not to decide what he becomes, but to decide what we become now that the web's awake." Those words echoed across the room. For the first time, the Spider-Verse wasn't reacting to chaos. It wasn't gathering to fight an enemy or prevent a multiversal collapse. It wasn't enforcing canon. It was guiding. The child on the bed lifted his glowing hand in front of his face. The light softened, then gathered into a single point at the center of his palm, a tiny spark that pulsed like a heartbeat. Miles exhaled. He's going to become something new, isn't he? Peter nodded slowly. Something the web's never seen before. Havich tilted his head. A new kind of spider. A new kind of story. Gwen smiled faintly. A new beginning. Miguel remained silent, his usually sharp gaze softened by the realization settling in. He'll need guidance, he finally said. Eventually. When he's older. But he won't need us now, Peter answered. Not yet. The heroes stepped back from the window, as though retreating from sacred ground. The glow faded to a gentle shimmer, leaving the child breathing steadily, unaware of the countless eyes watching him through the fabric of reality. The web pulsed again, approving. Miles turned to the others. So what do we do? Peter Parker took a long breath, the weight of countless stories in his eyes. We return to our worlds, he said softly. We prepare for the next step. We grow with the web. And when he's ready? Gwen asked. Miles answered before Peter could. We'll be here. All of us. The Watcher observed as the heroes stepped back into the tunnel of light, the threads beginning to retract, the Nexus calling them home. The new universe dimmed to a gentle silence, its first spider waiting unknowingly for the life ahead. The tremor settled. The web breathed. The awakening continued. And far across the multiverse, a child slept with a faint golden glow resting in his palm, the first spider of a world that had never known heroes. The universe that had never known a spider settled into a strange stillness after the heroes departed, as if the air itself was holding its breath. The child lay in bed with his glowing palm pressed against his chest, drifting into uneasy dreams shaped by images he didn't understand, threads of light, silhouetted figures, a faint hum like distant music. He didn't see the web. He didn't know the Spider-Verse had awakened. He only knew something inside him felt different. By morning, the glow had dimmed. Not gone, just quieter, like embers under ashes waiting for oxygen. He rose slowly from his bed, confusion heavy in his limbs. Every movement felt lighter, but also more deliberate, as if the world had shifted around him during the night. He flexed his fingers. No glow. No sparks. Just a faint tingling beneath the skin, like static charged with meaning. His name was Evan, though he didn't know yet that the universe would someday call him something else. The city around him was ordinary. Cars moved along predictable routes. People spoke in mundane rhythms. No one lifted cars or swung between buildings or fought masked villains. It was a world shaped by routine, not myth. Evan stepped out of his apartment building and felt something strange tug at him, not physically, but emotionally. A pull. A whisper. The awakening of the web reaching across a universe that had never before been connected. He didn't have the words for it. But the Spider-Verse knew exactly what it was. The boy walked toward school with his backpack slung over one shoulder, unaware that across countless realities, spider heroes were watching through the subtle vibrations of the web, not spying, not intruding, but sensing his emotional state the way the web sensed each of them. Peter Parker felt a faint echo in his spider sense as he brewed coffee in his apartment. Miles Morales felt a flutter in his chest as he crossed a Brooklyn street. Gwen Stacy paused mid-drumbeat, hearing a soft shift in her world's colors. Havich blinked, feeling a tug like the first drop of monsoon rain. Even Miguel O'Hara felt the tremor reverberate through his future tech suit. The web was listening. Reacting. Guiding. It knew the test was coming. Evan reached a crosswalk just as a gust of wind kicked up a paper cup that bounced across the sidewalk, distracting him. He caught the cup without thinking, impossibly fast. His hand moved before he had time to process the motion. He stared at his fingers. They tingled. He looked around. No one noticed. Just a kid catching trash blown by the wind. But Evan knew something was wrong, or right, he couldn't decide which. The first choice came 10 minutes later. A boy from his class, Marcus, stood by the side of the school fence, gripping the straps of his backpack so tightly his knuckles turned white. 3 older kids cornered him, their words sharp and quiet. "You gonna pay or not? You owe us. Don't make us take it." Evan had seen this before. Everyone had. Marcus was small, timid, always alone. Easy prey. Most kids walked past, eyes down, pretending not to hear. Evan himself had done that many times. Not because he was cruel, but because he was scared. Because stepping in meant becoming a target. He froze at the edge of the sidewalk, fear rooting him in place. The web pulsed. Across universes, spider heroes felt it. Miles, walking to class, stopped mid-step and whispered, "Here it comes." Peter's heart tightened, knowing the familiar shape of this moment. Gwen frowned, feeling her world's colors swirl. Miguel closed his eyes. Even he understood the significance. The child was facing his first choice, the same moral crossroads every spider person encountered, regardless of universe, age, or circumstance. Do you step in? Or stay silent? Evan looked at his hands. No glow. No power showing. Just fingers trembling with fear. The boys shoved Marcus. He stumbled. One grabbed his backpack. A tear slipped down Marcus's cheek. Something hot rose in Evan's chest. Not power. Not instinct. Not responsibility. Compassion. He took a breath. His legs moved before his fear could catch them. Leave him alone. The words were small. Cracked. Unsteady. But they cut through the tension like a sharp edge. The bullies turned, surprised. Marcus stared at Evan with wide, confused eyes. Evan's heart hammered so loudly he thought they could hear it. One of the older boys stepped forward, smirking. Or what? Evan didn't know. He didn't have a plan. He didn't have powers he understood. He was just a kid standing in front of a frightened classmate because something in him refused to walk away. I said stop. The older boy shoved him. Evan stumbled, should have hit the ground, but something in him reacted without conscious thought. His hand shot out, catching the fence post, stopping him mid-fall. A reflex too fast, too precise, too impossible for a normal child. The boys stared. Marcus stared. Evan stared at his own hand gripping the post. Silence froze the moment. Not because they suspected powers. But because they saw courage where they'd expected none. The older kids backed away, confused by the sudden shift in energy, not power, but the way Evan stood, taller somehow, braver somehow. Whatever, the ringleader muttered. Let's go. They left. Marcus exhaled shakily. Evan, why'd you? I don't know, Evan whispered truthfully. He didn't understand the glow. He didn't understand the reflex. He didn't understand the pull that had brought him into that moment. But the web understood. Across universes, spider heroes felt a joyful tremor, soft, warm, subtle. Peter smiled without knowing why. Miles felt his chest swell with pride. Gwen breathed easier. Pavitor whispered, he chose kindness. Even Miguel felt something he hadn't felt in a long time, hope. Evan looked down at his trembling hands. No glow. No dramatic burst of power. Just the quiet realization that he had made a choice. The right choice. The first choice. As he walked into the school with Marcus beside him, unaware of how deeply the web had felt his decision, a faint golden spark flickered beneath his skin, hidden, soft, waiting. The Spider-Verse had witnessed it. The web approved. The story had begun. Across the multiverse, something subtle but unmistakable began to shift. The heartbeat of the web, once faint, once distant, once barely perceptible, now pulsed with clarity. Not loud, not violent, but steady. Confident. Awake. Every spider person felt it in their own way, a hum beneath the skin, a soft glow behind their instincts, a new warmth threaded into their spider sense. It didn't disrupt their actions. It accompanied them, like a steady hand resting calmly on their shoulder. The awakening was no longer an event. It was becoming an equilibrium. Peter Parker noticed it first in the quietest moments. When he swung through New York's humid night air, he felt a second rhythm syncing with his own, tiny echoes of other leaps taken across other worlds. They didn't distract him. They guided him. His spider sense, once a sharp alarm, now carried an extra layer of intuition, as though it understood not just the shape of danger, but the emotional truth behind it. For Peter, the change was subtle but profound. For the first time since he was 15 years old, he didn't feel alone. Miles Morales sensed it too. Walking to school one morning, he caught a faint emotional vibration in his chest, a moment of pride that wasn't his, a feeling of triumph that pulsed across the web. When he paused, he realized what it was, Evan's first choice. The child hadn't done anything extraordinary by cosmic standards, he had just stood up for someone because it was right, but the web responded to that kindness like it was the spark of a new cosmic star. Miles grinned despite himself. "You're gonna be something," he whispered to the air, though the boy would never hear it. "You're already something." Gwen Stacy felt the shift more artistically. Her world's watercolor skies rippled with gentle hues she hadn't seen before, soft oranges swirling into pale pinks, dripping into lavender shades that matched the quiet optimism humming through the web. When she sat behind her drum set that evening, the rhythm she played wasn't just hers. It carried patterns she didn't recognize, faint echoes of melodies from other worlds. Her music became a reflection of connection, the emotional language of an awakening myth. Even Miguel O'Hara, who had once tried to enforce the web with rigid rules and canon structures, felt the pattern changing beneath him. His servers no longer flagged anomalies as threats. Instead, they treated them as possibilities. The Spider-Verse was no longer screaming when universes diverged or when new heroes emerged. It was breathing. Adapting. Growing. Miguel stood in the center of the Spider Society's primary atrium, watching the projections with a conflicted expression. The digital strands of the multiverse glowed brighter than ever, but they pulsed with a rhythm that didn't match his old models. Lila flickered into existence beside him. "You're quiet," she said gently. Miguel didn't answer at first. He stared at the map, thousands of universes connected like glowing constellations. "The web is changing," he finally said. His voice wasn't tense or harsh. It was thoughtful. "It's reorganizing itself." "Evolving," Lila suggested. Miguel exhaled. "Yeah. Evolving." He didn't say it aloud, but part of him felt relieved. For so long he had carried the fear of collapse like a weight across his shoulders, fighting to preserve a fragile structure he believed was crumbling. But now, the web no longer needed preservation. It needed understanding. And he, for the first time, was willing to try. Across the Nexus, the original gathering of spider heroes found themselves back in the heart of the web. Not summoned, invited. The glowing threads hummed with calm energy, resonating in patterns that were both familiar and entirely new. Peter, Miles, Gwen, Havoc, Hobie, Jess Drew, Haney, Mayday, Noir, and dozens more stood together again, not in crisis, not in urgency, but in curiosity. The heart of the web glowed softly, no longer flickering with volatile energy. It pulsed with a steady clarity, a sign of its fully awakened state. Miles looked around, eyes wide. "This feels different." "It's stable," Gwen murmured. "Like it's happy." Peter smiled a little. Is that possible? A happy multiverse? Hobie clicked his tongue. Dunno. But I like the vibe. They approached the heart, not with fear, but with reverence. The threads responded by brushing against them like gentle fingers, reading their emotions, sharing its own. Then the web showed them something new. A pattern. A visualization formed from light, not a diagram, not a map, but a heartbeat. A universal pulse. It showed them the emotional core that every spider person contributed to: kindness, courage, selflessness, humility. The qualities that define the mask, scattered across infinite worlds, now unified into a single rhythm. Peter's breath caught. It's us. Miles frowned softly. No. It's all of us together. Gwen stepped closer. This is what the web really is. It's not destiny. It's not canon. It's connection. The web pulsed in agreement. Then the pattern expanded into something even more remarkable, a new layer of spiral threads forming around its core. These threads represented stories yet to come, futures branching outward, unanswered questions, new heroes, evolving destinies. Paths that had not existed until the awakening. The Spider-Verse wasn't just connected. It was open. The heroes watched in awe as the pattern shifted, showing them infinite possibilities. Universes where new spiders would rise, where old stories would gain new meaning, where the mask would continue evolving alongside the worlds that needed it. Peter swallowed hard. This is beautiful. Miles nodded. This is the next era. Miguel stepped forward last, hesitating before letting the light touch him. When it did, the web responded warmly. Miguel's shoulders eased. He whispered, "So this is what the multiverse is meant to be. Not controlled. Not contained. Not dictated by tragedy. Guided by choice. Shaped by compassion. Strengthened by unity." The heroes stood together, feeling the new pattern settling around them like a gentle promise. The Spider-Verse had awakened. Its purpose had deepened. Its future had widened. And far away, in a quiet universe unaware of its own significance, a young boy named Evan walked home from school, unaware that the first choice he had made had already begun shaping the multiverse's new heartbeat. The web pulsed once more, faintly, like a whisper. A new age is beginning. When the light of the awakened web finally softened, the gathering of spider heroes stood in a quiet stillness, each of them absorbing the weight of what they had witnessed. The heart of the Spider-Verse, once a chaotic nexus of scattered threads, now pulsed with the calm confidence of something fully aware of itself. It no longer needed saving. It no longer needed defending. It simply existed. Harmonious, living, and whole. For the first time, the Spider-Verse felt complete. Peter Parker sensed the change most deeply. His spider sense, once a frantic alarm, now carried an undertone of warmth, a reminder that he was part of something larger, something that would never leave him isolated again. He positioned his mask over his face slowly, breathing in. When he exhaled, the air felt lighter. "This is different," he murmured. Miles Morales nodded beside him. "It's like the web is settling. Breathing." Gwen closed her eyes and felt the shifts of her own world's colors swirling gently behind her eyelids. The once chaotic splashes of watercolor hues had softened into balanced tones. "It's peaceful," she whispered. "I've never felt anything like this." Miguel O'Hara watched the heart of the web with careful eyes. He wasn't rigid now, nor tense. His guard had lowered in a way none of them had seen before. "We are connected," he said quietly. "But not controlled. Not bound by canon anymore." Hobie smirked. "'Bout time the multiverse chilled out." The others laughed softly, a sound that felt almost sacred in the center of the cosmic loom. The web pulsed in response, acknowledging their unity one final time before release. Peter looked around at the group assembled, Miles, Gwen, Pavitcher, Jess, Hobie, Penny, Noir, Mayday, Miguel, and countless more, some watching from the background, some leaning close. He felt something like pride well in his chest. "We've seen both the worst and the best of the multiverse," he said. "I think this is the best." Miles stepped forward, his voice clear and unwavering. "And now we go home. Not alone, not ever again, but still home." The web responded with a soft, shimmering pulse that wrapped around their feet, threads extending beneath them like living pathways, each thread pointing toward a different universe. The threads drifted into alignment, forming portals shaped like spirals of light. One by one, the heroes approached their designated paths. Pavitcher stepped toward his, pausing to grin. "If the Spider-Verse needs me again, I'll be ready. With style." "Always stylish, mate," Hobie replied, giving him a loose salute before swaggering toward his own portal, hands buried in his pockets, spikes glinting. Moore tipped his hat solemnly and faded into the monochrome shadows of his world. Penny nodded quietly and stepped into a portal filled with neon blue light, her mech silhouette momentarily visible through the glow. Jess Drew gave Peter a warm nod. "You did good, Parker." "You too," Peter answered. Gwen lingered beside Miles and Peter, eyes soft. "This changes everything." Miles nodded. "Yeah. But it changes us for the better." "See you again," Gwen whispered. "Always," Miles said. She stepped through her portal. And the watercolor universe pulled her home like a brushstroke being painted in reverse. Finally, only Peter, Miles, and Miguel remained. Miguel stared at the glowing thread leading to 2099. "The future feels different now," he admitted. "Different good?" Peter asked. Miguel hesitated, then nodded. "Different better." Miles clapped him gently on the shoulder. "You're part of this too. Don't forget that." For the first time, Miguel did something unexpected. He smiled. A real, sincere smile. "Thank you," he said quietly. With that, he walked toward his portal and disappeared into the sleek glow of his neon future. Peter and Miles stood alone for a final moment in the awakened nexus, the heart of the web glowing softly behind them. "You ready?" Peter asked. Miles smirked. "You're not my mentor anymore, Pete." "I've been ready." Peter laughed. "Yeah. You have." They stood together in companionable silence, watching. The golden strands pulse with life. The web didn't feel like a structure now. It felt like a community. A shared breath. A unified existence spanning infinite realities. Miles turned to his mentor. "See you out there, somewhere online, across the web." Peter grinned. "Yeah. Somewhere out there." They walked to their portals together, their threads diverging but still intertwined through the awakened web. At the last second, they exchanged a nod, equal parts goodbye and never goodbye. Miles stepped into his portal. Peter stepped into his. And the realm of threads collapsed gently behind them, folding into a resting state, calm, stable, harmonious. The Watcher lingered alone for a moment, observing the undisturbed glow of the awakened Spider-Verse. He recognized the importance of this moment. A myth once rooted in isolation had transformed into a collective legend. A story once defined by tragedy had evolved into one defined by unity. A mask once worn by one had become a symbol worn by countless. The web slept, not in weakness, but in strength. The return was complete. And far away, in a quiet universe illuminated by evening light, young Evan walked home from school with a slight smile on his face, unaware that the future of the Spider-Verse was now threaded around him like a protective halo. He was not alone. He never would be. The multiverse moves in rhythms too vast for most to notice. Worlds spin, stories unfold, heroes rise, choices ripple outward like echoes across still water. Time stretches and bends, weaving destinies through dimensions that never touch yet always influence each other. But somewhere within those infinite harmonies lies a single, unbroken thread, a pattern of courage, compassion, and responsibility that refuses to fade. The Spider-Verse. Once scattered. Once fractured. Once divided into countless isolated stories. Now awakened. The heart of the web. Once hidden, once dormant, pulsed softly through the fabric of reality. It was neither a god nor a machine, neither a conductor nor a commander. It was something far simpler, far more profound, the collective spirit of every spider person who had ever taken a leap of faith. Peter Parker, swinging over the rooftops of New York, felt the warmth of that connection every time he breathed. His spider sense no longer screamed loneliness. It hummed like a familiar melody. A reminder that he belonged not just to Queens or to the people he saved, but to a greater story that honored both his scars and his strength. Miles Morales sensed it too. When he vaulted from a Brooklyn fire escape into the sparkling night, he felt a subtle pull, not dragging him elsewhere, but reminding him that somewhere, in another universe, someone else was taking a similar leap, defying gravity and fear in equal measure. Gwen Stacy drummed in her room, colors swirling behind her like a living symphony. Every beat she struck echoed faintly through the awakened web, resonating with rhythms played in worlds far from her own. Miguel O'Hara worked in his lab, but this time with patience instead of obsession. The web had taught him something he had long forgotten, that the future was not a threat, but a possibility. A place for hope. Pavitra Prabhakar watched the sunrise over Mumbattan, feeling the warmth on his face and the subtle flicker of the web in his chest. He whispered a prayer, part gratitude, part promise. Hobie Brown lounged across a water tower, grinning at the skyline, knowing the system of the multiverse was no longer something he needed to rebel against. The web had become as free and fluid as he was. Mayday Parker toddled across her living room floor as Peter B. Parker watched her, overwhelmed by the miracle of quiet, ordinary life. Even she, in her tiny steps, pulsed with the faintest thread of the awakened web. And far beyond them all, in a universe untouched by the old canon, a young boy named Evan sat on the edge of his bed, staring at the faint golden glow under his skin. He didn't know what he was becoming. He didn't know the magnitude of the story he was stepping into. But he felt a warmth inside him. A quiet certainty that whatever he was meant to be, he wouldn't face it alone. The web felt his heartbeat. The web felt his potential. The web welcomed him. Across countless worlds, spider heroes paused, not consciously, not deliberately, but in subtle, instinctive recognition. A new thread had joined the pattern. A new voice had entered the chorus. A new era had begun. Not one of crisis. Not one of canon. Not one of tragedy. But one of unity. The watcher gazed upon the awakened web with a rare sense of peace. He knew myths like this did not end. They expanded, evolved, grew richer with each retelling. The Spider-Verse was no longer a collection of isolated sagas, it was a living constellation. And constellations do not vanish. They simply shine brighter. Generation after generation. So the web pulsed once more, a heartbeat echoing across realities. A promise. A reminder. A beginning. Because the Spider-Verse is eternal. As long as there are people willing to leap. To care. To carry responsibility. To choose kindness even when afraid. The mask will have a place in the multiverse. The spider will always find a home. And the web will never stop growing. Not today. Not tomorrow. Not in any universe. For heroes are not born from fate. Heroes are born from choice. And the Spider-Verse, now fully awake, knows this truth better than ever. The story continues. In every world. In every heart. In every thread. Forever.